Chapter 61, Duck and Ducklings. Hearing his compliments made me raise a brow. This body had no accomplishments to speak of, most people still knew me only because I was Arthur's son. So Will was obviously being a kiss-ass, trying to get in my good graces. Oh, he sure as hell doesn't seem to like me, I can see it in his eyes and body language. But he was trying to be careful and mindful around me. Finally being at a stage where people try to get in your good graces felt nice. But that wasn't enough, I knew what John Connington wanted. He wanted me to put dear Aegon on the throne, which I would never do. What benefits would someone like me get from it? Nothing. Oh, get the rightful king on the throne? Hell, I couldn't care less who sat down on the Iron Throne. It could be a squirrel that the king fucked and I wouldn't bat an eye. Daenerys would be the better choice, especially if she decided to marry me. If she doesn't marry me, then the best she will get is neutrality in the war, because if I wasn't gaining something from the war then I also wasn't fighting in it. Wars were dangerous, and people died endlessly. Thousands of arrows would fill the sky. If my body was destroyed before my hawk could pick my soul then I would be dead. If my hawk was shot down, then I would also be dead. Yes, I understand what you want, Sir Will, I told him carefully with restraint. Everyone would like to see the rightful king on the throne. He breathed a sigh of relief. I am glad you understood, my lord. He pulled out a sealed letter and put it on my desk. This is only for your eyes, my lord. I nodded. Your message has been received, Sir Will. Let the Golden Company know this. But never expect me to fight in a senseless war. I understand, my lord, he bowed. We must also be wary of the spider in King's Landing. The man can hear songs even from the other side of the sea. Oh? So they want me to think that Varys wasn't involved in this? Thankfully from the books I knew better. The spider had a part of the pie in every part of the war, no matter who won, at least Varys wouldn't lose. Sure, he preached a lot about wanting peace in the realm, but he never really delivered in the whole peace thing. His words said one thing and his actions said another. He never told Ned about the betrayal that would happen in the throne room. He just walked off before even the betrayal happened. Varys had betrayed every person he had served, for the realm of the people? Right, that was a damn lie, a big one too. He didn't know Viserys was mad? Even though he had the best spy network at the time and his best friend was housing the young prince. Yeah, as a soldier of mine used to say when we went hunting. Why don't you piss in my ear and tell me it's raining too? Because sure as hell Varys wasn't being honest. To me, it seemed like he was just trying to let chaos reign in the realm and even made the chaos itself sometimes. Like letting Tyrion go like that, knowing that he would find his father and the whore she betraying him. As Will walked out, my eyes were glued to the door. I needed to get rid of Aegon, this guy would have to go. It was clear that Varys was encouraging chaos in the realm, only to have this guy come here to fix everything. If he was able to do that then people wouldn't care whose son he was. It took almost a month for my merchandise to arrive here and here she was in all her glory. She wore dark tight clothes and a cloak. Arianne looked nervously at me, her eyes didn't hide anything. She was filled with desperation and broken at her father's betrayal. Just like I needed her to be. Arianne Martell, many rumors have been spreading around. Some say that you have run away from Dorne with a lover, is that true? I asked her, trying to put as much suspicion as I could in my voice. Acting as if this whole situation hadn't been orchestrated by me. No. She refused the rumors wholeheartedly. That is untrue. My father orchestrated it all, he was going to have me killed. I frowned at her words. Why would your father want to kill you? Because he doesn't like how I acted till now, she reasoned, causing my frown to deepen and made myself appear as if I was thinking hard about what I should say. But in reality, she was acting dumb and like a slut in the making. Dorne might have their own culture about these kinds of matters, but Doran Martell probably wanted his daughter to marry outside of the family. The rest of Westeros lords wouldn't want to marry their sons to a lady that might come to be known as a loose woman. But would your father truly do something like that? Is your behavior that bad? No, I haven't even slept with a man yet. Even my purity is intact, she said with eyes full of conviction. Though I do admit to having asked some people to spend the night with just to irritate my father. Well, I don't care about any of that. She could have slept with 40,000 Dothraki horses and it wouldn't matter one bit to me. Arianne Martell's value came solely from her bloodline and name. But her virginity will be valued in my alliance with Dorne. If my memory serves me right, she was offered to Viserys for her hand in marriage. Just knowing that fact was enough to turn Westeros upside down and give Robert a reason to obliterate Dorne. The place might not have been conquered by dragons before, but they forget that it had been conquered. How did you come to such an assumption? Your father doesn't seem like the man to do something like that, even though I haven't met him personally before, so my assessment might be wrong. My words seemed to annoy her. One of the guards said before he tried to kill me. Though he was killed due to the chaos, some soldiers came upon us and tried to kill him. They probably weren't aware of the situation. I just ran away and met with Davos, and as they say, the rest is history. Come on now lady, don't make my plans sound so simple. It took endless hours to get everything right and have other people keep a watch just in case and eliminate each loose end in the plan. Only Davos was left alive and even he had no idea what had gone on in there. Since Davos has guaranteed your trustworthiness, then I will decide to trust you too, for the time, I said with a gentle smile. Though we will have to hide your identity. I didn't point out any of the holes in her story, after all, the truth will soon come out. Meaning that something that everyone believes will come out and that will be taken as the truth on the matter. Arianne. As Arianne walked out of Lord Redhawk's room, she felt a weight leave her shoulders. She had heard rumors about the man's father, Arthur, but Oliver was relatively unknown to most people. He didn't have anything like his father's undefeatable record whether in a sword fight or battle. Arthur never lost. But now seeing Oliver, he truly lived up to the Redhawk name. Just his presence alone was suffocating, though he seemed to not be a bad guy. She walked along the hall and didn't look at the two guards in front of Lord Redhawk's door. They radiated a creepy feeling for some reason. As she was walking she came upon a familiar bald man, she couldn't help but smile at this. Did everything go all right? Asked Davos, the bald middle-aged man. He had helped her come across the sea and was truly a kind soul. Also, he seemed to have Oliver's trust, so that was a bonus too. Yeah, it won't be long before I seduce your liege lord, Davos, Arianne said jokingly. He was like the father she never really had during her childhood. Doran always seemed to put his plans and schemes above everything else, raising her had been just a side job. Davos was genuinely happy when he heard that everything had gone well. I am glad, Lord Oliver will keep you safe. He is a good and smart man, but please don't cause him trouble. I wouldn't want to be the reason he had to start a war with Dorne. Yeah, she said, waving him off. Don't worry too much, I will be careful. Though she said it dismissively, she truly heeded his advice. After all, she didn't want to bring trouble to the person who had saved her. Davos then excused himself as he went to speak to Oliver for some matters. Arianne was tempted to try and listen in on such matters. But decided not to since the creepy guards were still there, and Davos might get in trouble because of her. It felt weird, having to hold herself back so she doesn't cause problems to the people around her. This was something she never even cared about before. But as she traversed the castle, Arianne got lost and walked into an empty hallway and saw two maids talking to each other in whispers. Suddenly one of them, an old woman with green eyes like wildfire, looked at her. She heard us, yelled the old woman in panic, and the one she was talking to, another old woman with blood-red eyes, seemed even more on edge. I didn't mean to. Also, I heard nothing, said Arianne as she slowly tried to back off. She could see that the situation just started growing tense. Don't forget to throw some power stones. Chapter 62, Scenario. Arianne POV. The two old women walked towards Arianne slowly. Don't make any noise, girl, or we will kill you. The red-eyed granny pulled out a dagger and licked it. Come here now, little girl. Arianne took a breath and was ready to scream. After all, when your enemy said to not make a noise, you should do the opposite of it. What's going on here? A group of guards suddenly came from around the corners and surrounded the women. No servants are allowed to carry weapons in these halls. The elderly grannies looked frightened, and the green-eyed one tried to reason. Wait, we. Squish. She didn't get a chance to say anything as a spear pierced her from behind. The other one was killed too with a spear piercing her throat. Arianne breathed a sigh of relief, till all of the spears turned towards her. A man who seemed to lead the guards stepped forward and pulled out his sword. You are also under suspicion. What were you talking about with these women? She didn't know what to say, but she knew that from the guards' perspective things would have seemed suspicious. I just walked in on them, and heard them say something about an assassination plan against Lord Oliver. Though Arianne had heard nothing, she knew she had to make herself seem useful. No one here knew her real identity, and the guards didn't seem the kind type who would spare a damsel in distress. The head guard pointed his sword at her throat. Tell me what you heard and maybe then I will decide to let you get out of here alive. As if. I can see it in your eyes. That sword will slit my throat instantly as soon as I become useless to them. Contemplated Arianne, trying to think of the best decision she could make right now. The guards were very brutal in their methods, and security was tight around here. Anyone who was even a little suspicious got stabbed. I am someone who came in with Davos Seaworth, a man that even Lord Oliver trusts. In response the head guard only drew the sword closer to Arianne's neck, piercing her skin, and a drop of blood slowly tailed down her breasts. I do not care who you came in with, said the head guard. We only take orders from Lord Oliver, for all we know you could be some whore who charmed the sailor. Also, your strange Dornish accent is prevalent, those desert fuckers are known for their poison. Yeah, that is reasonable, but come on. Arianne's thoughts were a mess. Her heartbeat skyrocketed. It felt like she was at death's door all again. Just like when she was about to be killed in that desert just outside the city she had grown up in. How about you take me to Lord Oliver? That would be the safest way to prove things. I don't work on proving things. I work by killing people. The headstrong guard didn't budge even in front of Ariane's beauty. They were still ready to slit her throat. She assumed that the only reason why the guards hadn't killed her was that she didn't have a weapon in her hand. Also, she was only one girl and couldn't fight against over a dozen guards that had gathered here. Davos POV. Seeing Lord Oliver smile as he put a sea map in front of him made Davos realize that he just got himself some more world to do. They had just discussed the situation with Ariane, and Oliver seemed to understand her situation and agreed to help her. Of course, that wouldn't be free though, as he had another job for Davos. Lord Oliver pointed to some islands north of the Vale. I need your help with these. You want me to help you take over the Three Sisters? Asked Davos. These places haven't been worth taking over, they have no value. Also, the pirates there have fleets that could contend with the royal fleet. No, I don't want your help to take them over. Instead, you should. Oliver was interrupted as the door opened and the guards came in with Ariane. Her hands were tied behind her back. Lord, the head guard came forward, kneeling in front of his lord. This woman says that she heard a plot against you, but refuses to tell us what it was. Oh, is that so? Oliver narrowed his eyes in suspicion while looking at the young woman. Ariane, already causing trouble? No, my lord. I was just thinking of how to save myself from your bloodthirsty guards. She answered sincerely. They are a little too quick on the draw. Better than being too slow at it, he added. Ariane couldn't figure out what the man in front of her was thinking. He just looked at her intently. Still though, while I trust Davos with my life, his judgment could have been wrong about you, so I will have you get 2 new handmaidens. If you are seen out of your designated room without them, the guards will have the permission to kill you. Yeah, my lord. She nodded, understanding that from Oliver's view, he had to be careful about these matters. Though Ariane couldn't help but think highly of the bodyguards, they were all like mad animals that seemed to cut you up first and ask questions later. The guards weren't the smartest tools in the shed, but they were trustworthy. Oliver could trust in their bloodlust to kill anything that seemed even remotely suspicious. They didn't have the mindset for betrayal, or anything else that wasn't killing. Davos stood from the side and observed the meeting. He knew that Ariane was just like a caged bird wanting freedom. But she had to be careful against Oliver because the man was uncannily like his father. Arthur would kill without a second thought, it didn't matter how pretty you were. Still, though, he couldn't take Ariane's side and say that she was unlikely to be a spy. Not only would that undermine Oliver in front of his men, but it was also something useless to say. After all, Davos was confident that Lord Oliver knew what was happening here. But still, some spies were able to get in here? Davos couldn't wrap his head around that. This place had top-notch security. The background checks were very detailed and extensive. Unless Oliver had decided to bring them in himself, Davos didn't believe there was another way to get into the castle. The guards were always like hunting dogs, just waiting for someone to show any sign of betrayal. In the end, the sailor decided to stop wondering how the grannies were able to get in here. Instead, he was more worried about Lord Oliver's plan with the Three Sisters Islands and the role he would play. Sometimes Davos felt like his lord's trust in him was unwarranted. By now the ex-smuggler knew enough about Oliver's plans that if spoken without care could bring the young lord down. Especially the scheme against the Reach, which would spike another trade with the most fertile land in the Seven Kingdoms. Oliver POV. Ariane, my dear Ariane, it seems like she was way more naive than I thought. Hope you can see things from my point of view and understand that these measures need to be taken. She nodded in understanding. Undoubtedly she had a wild side to her, but that can be tamed with some good old mental manipulation. I won't change for others, but I have always been good at changing others around me to suit my needs. Also thankfully the head guard killed those grannies, having them come here and pay them to say that around the hall Ariane was walking towards was quite hard to get. The whole scheme would have gone bad if Ariane had decided to go the other way, though that was where the blood zombies were and those things always give people the chills. In the end, though, everything worked out quite nicely. Now I only need a reason to attack the Three Sisters and take over that place. Chapter 63, Suspicious Movements. A month passed since Ariane had joined, meaning that soon some people from Dorne would be coming here. I already knew the barber and the butcher in Ogre Street were their spies. It felt so good having so much control. Though this didn't bring me the closure it once did, dying at the hands of my kid was more than enough to wake me up. There were probably spies within this very castle that I don't know about, maybe one of the guards might be it. Sure, the spider's little birds might not be here, but the spider also had other people spy for him. Just like he had done with Baelish, getting one of his whores to become a spy. A lot had happened this last month, and the most prevalent was that I am now a married man. Said a lot of vows before the 7 gods and probably broke every single one of them by now. The wedding night was kinda boring, but Ariane was a virgin, so that's to be expected. The door to my office opened and my wife came in. She had a smile on her face and a maid walking behind her. "Dear husband, do you like this girl? She is a village girl and pure like a flower, should we take her to bed?" "Well, at least she isn't bringing me any more random women to bed. Dorne taught their women some weird shit, how the hell did any of the lords of Westeros marry into Dorne families? If even a princess who had a strict father acted like this, then what about the others?" Though maybe that was part of the thrill. At least after the first night, Ariane understood that she couldn't keep up with me and decided to bring on other women. Maybe she was trying to control my list, and if I was gonna cheat anyway, then it better be with someone she can control. Every person wants to have control in their life, and they also want to have ease of mind and not worry about things. Still, though, I cheated very much and barely paid any compliments to Ariane. For most people, this would cause their spouse to run away with another man. This won't happen to me though, because a spouse can be disloyal and betray their husbands. What I needed to be to her was a firm father figure, an authority figure she can respect, something that she hasn't had in her life. A teacher wasn't all-knowing in their subject, and parents aren't always right. That was the truth. After all, they were human. Yet to their children and students, a good teacher and parent were just that. Authority figures that seemed insurmountable, and you should do everything to please them. "No," I answered her curtly. "I do not like how she carries herself." I wasn't just a yes man to Ariane. If I started listening to her every word about the matters of our sex life and bed, then she will be able to control me that way. Okay, she looked disappointed at my refusal and waved off the farm girl. Whether she was doing these things with intentions to have some control over me or just have some fun was unknown. I knew how threesomes worked. Paying more attention to the other woman was just a disaster waiting to happen. Accidentally coming inside the woman who isn't your wife, then one should already get their divorce papers ready. Anyway, what kind of girl should I get then? She asked with an innocent look on her face. She is giving me control so easily and without any sly underhanded move. Like a girl offering her boyfriend for a threesome with a mother girl, and after the thing is over then she requests a threesome with another guy. Wait, why the hell am I even contemplating threesomes all of a sudden? Even in my first world I barely had any threesomes unless they were with some hookers. Was I wrong about her? Is she truly so naive? Or maybe this was her play all along? Well, only time would tell. Because while her actions said that she was naive, Gerald also acted like a naive child that always tried to make me proud. In the end, he pushed me off a ship and ended the life that I had worked so hard to build a reputation for. I like the girls to be northern girls or those that have Valyrian descent. Stating my preferences would normally reveal a weakness in me. But this wasn't bad. I had no preferences in women, but these two kinds of people have the blood that had the strongest connotations with magic. Those will be hard to find, Ariane contemplated, sighing in disappointment. Anyway, there is something I need to give you. She pulled a small piece of paper from her bras and put it on the table. It was a secret letter and had contents about where she should go to escape. Someone would be there to pick her up too. I see, so what's your decision? Hey. Ariane had a confused look on her face. Why would I go back to the family that would want to kill me? But dear wife, nowhere in the letter does it say that your family was the one who sent it. This was why I never revealed anything to her that was too important. She didn't have the mind for political plays. I see. Still though, it was better to go along with her schemes. If she knew that the letter was from her family, it meant that someone she knew well came to give it to her. And I have no idea who that person was. But you know, I always suspected that your father might not be someone who would kill you. Take this with a grain of salt, but I believe that the whole situation you experienced in Dorne might have been orchestrated by someone. She looked shocked at the revelation, but less shocked than I predicted. Plus her body language showed that she already might have suspected something like this. Her left shoulder usually shakes when she is truly surprised. This whole thing smells suspicious. Should I just kill her already and make it seem like an accident? No, she needs to give me a child first, only then she can have her accidental death. Is that truly what you think? She asked, having calmed down and her fist tightening. It seemed like she knew something, but wasn't talking about it. But Ariane still was followed by her ladies-in-waiting at all times. There was no chance they didn't already see something. Did they betray me? Were they bought off? But I have their families in my palm, just a word from me would be enough to kill them all. While this was a possibility, there was another more likely option. Yes, though not confirmed yet. Some of my spies have said that the day you were kidnapped the whole city was in disarray. Even the royal guards were infiltrated, men who stood close to your father. They could just pull out their swords and kill the Lord of House Martell with one swing. It was a lost cause to blame Doran anymore. The plan needed to be remade a little. Time to make an imaginary bogeyman take the blame for my actions. Then, I need your help to find the culprit. She said, her eyes filled with passion. While the circumstances were always strange, I am glad that you ended up becoming my husband. This time, I could trust her words as I knew them to be true. Her father always wanted to marry her off to old men. At least that was what she thought. Instead Doran had intended to make her queen and marry Viserys. But in her mind, our marriage was the safety she needed to feel for herself. I got up from my desk and approached Arianne. Once close, I touched her cheek and felt the caramel skin beneath my hand. She was quite a beauty, no doubt. You are my wife now, of course, any problem that you have will become our problem now. We are one for eternity. Arianne jumped in my arms once she heard that and kissed me passionately. As we were kissing, I sensed the life that was inside of her. Due to the blood magic that flew through my veins, I could sense that my child was already conceived. Maybe she won't end up dead, after all, my child would need a mother figure. And in case it was a girl, then we would need to try again and make a boy this time. These thoughts went through my mind as we kissed, and once we separated, Arianne had a vixen-like smirk. I will be waiting for you in our bedroom, she whispered in my ear. Then she walked out of the room, and when she did so before I could sit down one of her ladies in waiting came in and her face was filled with panic. My lord. Urgent news. She declared. Lady Arianne talked to someone while she went into the ladies' bathroom for a couple of seconds. And as you advised, we spied on her through the peepholes and saw the person she was talking to and what they talked about. Oh? And who was that person she talked to? Now, this was quite serious. Prince Oberyn Martell, he had somehow infiltrated the castle. A/N, the MC isn't the only competent person here. The God world had many people who were good at what they did. Also people can think for themselves and have their own ambitions, so not everyone will believe the MC or follow him blindly. And he knows that. P.S. Don't forget to throw some power stones. Chapter 64, Backstab. Oberyn Martell. Entering the Lord's Castle in London City had to be one of the hardest things Oberyn had ever done. The place was not only littered with guards, but spies were in every corner before one even entered the castle. Entering that place for a long-term period was impossible, every servant and guard was heavily screened before they joined the staff. By this Oberyn could tell that the new Lord Redhawk was very paranoid. Which in these cases wasn't a bad thing. Sure, for some families it might have been hard to fund such heavy security, but House Redhawk seemed to never run out of money. That's what thousands of ships trading through the world get you, Oberyn muttered as he looked at his surroundings. A butcher's attic. It was dark, damp, and cold. Well, it was too hot during the day and too cold at night. The place was sure to have someone catch some kind of grayscale if they stayed there too long. But still, the Prince of Dorne was headstrong. He had just gone and met with his niece, having knocked out a guard and taken his armor to anger. Luckily he had bumped into Arianne within a short period after entering the palace. Still though, somehow he was discovered and had barely been able to escape his captors. Oberyn had never met Oliver, he didn't know what kind of man the young lord was. But he knew Arthur Redhawk, the founder of this house. It was better to commit suicide than to get caught by him. He had heard the terrible tales during Robert's rebellion. Arthur had played a vital role in the war. He shook his head lightly and thought about other matters. Like the incident that had disoriented the whole of Dorne. Someone is playing the Martells. He mumbled, even now the words sounded strange to him. His brother, Doran, had been played like a puppet. Whoever was behind this all worried both of them. Also for some reason, the person wanted to implicate House Redhawk by having Arianne coincidentally come here. The plan had been meticulous, no witnesses were left behind. Everyone had been terminated, it felt more like a ghost story than a real thing. It was absurd for a person to be able to come up with such a detailed plan and find people skilled enough to carry it out. After all, most plans failed because the people in it were, well, people, they got drunk, missed their shot, or were later on the schedule. Bam, bam, bam. Oberyn heard some loud noises below him, and it seemed like some people bashed in the butcher's door. He put his ear on the ground to hear what was going in. Where are you hiding him? Yelled out one of the guards. What are you talking about, sir? The butcher's stuttering voice showed that he was truly scared. Oberyn reminded himself to ask his brother to increase this spy's reward because most people would have ratted him out. It didn't matter how brave or smart some people thought they were, once a knife was pointed at their throats, all that bravery and intelligence went down the drain. Even thinking clearly became hard in those situations. We know he is here. Yelled out another guard, and the sound of metal bashing against flesh rang out. A guard had just punched the butcher, and no voice was heard from the latter anymore. Oberyn decided that it was better to cut off his losses now while he could. So he got up slowly so he didn't make any sound, and opened the window on the roof, going outside. But as soon as his eyes adjusted to the sunlight, he saw a dozen spears pointed at his throat. One move and you are dead, said one of the men calmly. They all were wearing the same uniform with dark and green garments and the Redhawk sigil on their chest plate. Oberyn contemplated trying to fight off the men, but he didn't have his spear on him and the small dagger hidden in his belt wouldn't be enough. So he put his hands up. Okay, I surrender. Swish. But the next thing he felt was a sharp pain in his leg. Ah! He yelled out, falling on his back and clutching the leg that kept bleeding profusely. Let's move fast before he bleeds to death, said the soldier who stabbed him. I don't know if I hit some vein or not. You probably did, why can't you stop being so crazy, Mika? Asked one of the other guards jokingly. Suck my cock, replied the soldier who stabbed Oberyn. Maybe then I will stop being so crazy. Hey, now, there is no need to fight. Intervened the guard who had the biggest build amongst them. You can just suck my cock and it will calm you both. Shut the fuck up, sword swallower. Mika frowned. Their banter continued till they reached a place called Healer's Room, the place where there were many beds. By then Oberyn was pale and his breaths were stunned. He was barely able to hear what the others were saying, he had zoned out the soldiers' banters long ago. They just talked way too much. When the healer saw that, he immediately yelled at the men. What the seven hells? He is almost dead. Put him down on one of the beds quickly. Oberyn felt like his head was ringing due to all the screams between the healer and soldiers. His conscience was slowly slipping off, he couldn't hold on as he had already lost too much blood. Can you stop talking about cocks? He barely was able to get out, and the healer was able to hear him. But the situation was worse as the man started yelling at the soldiers about something and this made Oberyn's headache increase tenfold. He hated this place, they even treated the Prince of Dorne like a two-bit thug. None of the soldiers even bothered to listen to him when he told them that he would bleed out. Sure, he had talked a little smugly, but the worst was that they hadn't even heard him and let him bleed out so much. Arianne Martell. Arianne was resting in her lavish room, being massaged by a tan woman that had come from the Summer Islands. Her bed was so big that it could fit 10 people in it. The woman with caramel-like skin was embroidered with inexpensive jewelry and had a mischievous smile as her hand slipped and touched her breast. Sorry, my lady, the woman apologized but didn't remove her hand and instead kept fondling Arianne's chest. She wasn't bothered by it, instead, she smirked. Don't worry, Burra. The woman smiled as she was called by her name and she leaned forward. Burra's chest now touched Arianne's back and she whispered into her ear. My lady, I don't think I will be able to hold myself back. You don't need to. Arianne gave her permission and the servant bit her ear softly. Burra then took advantage of the situation and turned her lady around, the servant's hands cupping her chest. But she didn't mind and even had a smirk on her face. You are quite enthusiastic. Were you the same way with my husband? Burra stopped mid-action and all of her excitement simmered out. I am sorry, my lady, Lord Oliver was. Don't give me excuses, Arianne interrupted her. The small smile on her face never changed. We both know how convincing Oliver can be. So tell me, were you this aggressive with him? Also, don't worry, I don't mind if you slept with him. The caramel-skinned servant's body relaxed once she heard Arianne's reassuring words. But the latter noticed that Burra was no longer in the mood, it seemed like the words had surprised her and taken all of the excitement out of the act. Lord Oliver, well, he is fierce, like always. Even in bed, though he seems to like dominating everything, even women. In bed he is a beast, you should join us, my lady. It would only increase the fun and I am sure Lord Redhawk would like it. Burra seemed to want to fix the bridge that had been built between Arianne and her. After all, no woman would be happy to learn that her servant had been fucking their husband. Arianne wasn't any different and even though she had a smile on his face, inside she was fuming with anger. She didn't like Oliver sleeping with other women, especially when she didn't know about it. This wasn't just simple jealousy either, but what if the woman Oliver slept with wanted to take her place? Then they could kill her. The lord of the house though didn't seem to care about any of this and only watched from the sidelines. Ambition, that was the thing that Oliver used to inspire his women. He made them feel special enough that even a common maid gained thoughts of being his lady. So while the castle was safe from any enemies against its lord, Arianne felt like the whole place was a death trap for her. Plus she always had to have women with her, as having men would be seen as strange and rumors would start popping up. So this put her in quite a perilous situation. She didn't think that even those close to her would betray her for a man. Even though Arianne had tried to build good relationships with the women here, it was impossible to control them. Also, the people that truly like her, for example, a pretty farm girl that had her family brought out of poverty by her. That would have been perfect, yet Oliver refused the offer for a threesome. This made Arianne quite annoyed. Burra, you lay down. I want to be on top today. The servant listened and relaxed her body, and as Arianne got up, she laid down. Now it was her turn to be on top and she didn't hold back, laying down and kissing Burra's neck. Then her hand slipped under the pillow and she pulled out an object. Swish. Burra's eyes widened as she stared at Arianne. The latter had a cold look on her face as she stabbed on the neck her servant who also acted as her best friend. Blood pooled on the bed. You think I didn't know you had stopped taking your moon tea? Asked Ariane, clenching her teeth in anger. So you wanted to bear Oliver's children, didn't you? Fucking slut. You wanted to take my place. That's the same as trying to kill me, whore. I gave you everything and helped you, yet you try to go after my husband. Before she noticed, she had stabbed Burra's dead body over 30 times and was covered in blood. But as she calmed down a little, Ariane looked at her friend's body and frowned. How would she be able to hide this now? Ariane noticed the sheets that were drenched in blood, Burra's body with stabs. She now knew that hiding the body would be very hard. At the same time, a red hawk flew to her window and looked at her. She looked at the bird and snickered. This place is creepy as fuck. The hawk tilts its head to the side as if confused by her words. Chapter 65, Control? You don't need it. A tall female servant came to Ariane's room and called out. My lady, Lord Oliver has called you. He seems to have something to tell you. There was some ruffling heard from the other side and Ariane's head popped out of the door. She was flushed and shaken. Yeah, tell him that I will be there immediately. The servant nodded, but she still stayed outside and waited there. Suddenly 2 guards walked past the hallways and Ariane's nervous demeanor became even more visible. I will be waiting here, my lady. Ariane was angry and a polite but tight smile adorned her face. While the servant was supposed to listen to her too as the lady of the house, they would take Oliver's orders and interests before hers any day. Okay, wait outside. I will be back in a little. She then hurried to close the door, but the servant got a hold of the edge of the door and looked Ariane straight in the eyes. Do you need help putting on your dress? No. Ariane was quick to refuse and she could see that the servant was already very suspicious of something happening. I am not a child, I can put on my clothes. She closed the door and the servant was left outside to wait, and a small smirk adorned the maid's face. But it was gone as soon as it came. She seemed amused by Ariane's excuses and the mental breakdown of the young lady. When people are at their weakest they reveal their true nature. I will go and inform Lord Oliver then, the maid bowed even though there was no one there and walked off. As the servant walked out she went to Oliver's office and opened the door. The 2 guards outside only looked at her once and didn't stop her. Once inside, the office was empty so the servant tugged at her face and her face came off like a snake shedding its skin. Out of the maid's female features came a handsome male face with dark eyes and silver hair. It was Oliver using the same technique as the faceless men. He sat down on his chair and crackled, thinking of what Ariane had just done. The young woman had tried to sell herself as the victim, but she was a predator out there. Killing some girl that he didn't bother to remember the name of, and doing it all in cold blood. He could even see it in her eyes, she truly believed that this was the right thing to do. But Oliver saw it differently, to him she was just doing this to make herself feel in control of the situation. It wasn't the right thing to do, after all, where would she even hide the body? It would have been better to just throw the woman off a window and make it seem like an accident. But for her petty revenge, Ariane had just killed a woman in her bed with a fruit knife that she usually used. Her sheets should be covered in blood by now, so there was no way she could hide anything anymore. Oliver turned his chair and stared out of his window, mesmerized by the sight of his city. It was named London for multiple reasons, just in case someone from his world had reincarnated, then he would kill them off too if they came to him. After all, 2 people knowing the future events wasn't good at all, like a secret between 3 men, it could only be kept if 2 of them were dead. Knock knock knock. 3 soft knocks sounded from the door, and by the rhythm and sound of it, Oliver could tell it was Ariane. Come on in. She entered and was wearing a blue dress that showed off her cleavage. Oliver didn't bother hiding his gaze and looked straight at his wife's chest. You look charming today. Thank you, Oliver, she smiled happily, but he could tell that it was fake. Real smiles cause the eyes to move. It is fake if the rest of the person's face stays still while they are smiling. Also, another hint was that people who smile genuinely are less likely to expose the bottom row of teeth. A fake smile is more likely to include both rows of teeth. Glad I was able to catch your eye. Maybe we could do something tonight with the dress. Telling when someone's smile is false was a useful skill to have, both in a modern work environment or a medieval world. Of course, but why wait till bedtime? Oliver POV. There was a certain satisfaction watching Ariane's reaction as I leaned back on my chair. She wasn't in the mood for this after just killing someone, at the same time she must be mentally weak right now. As she came close I pulled her down, she leaned on the desk and sat down on my lap. Her eyes met mine and a smile that didn't reach her eyes seemed to be ever present. I decided to add a little fuel to the flame and said. Also, my guards accidentally found your Uncle Oberyn and took him for an intruder. He almost died due to blood loss, hopefully, he lives. His condition isn't quite stable yet. At first, I was expecting an explosive display of anger from her, but instead, she tried to pull herself in a sitting position, which proved harder than she had been thinking after our rather intimate position. On her face, I could see tendrils of anger that were trying to form, but they failed to attain success. It wasn't a huge shock. With the recent state of her emotions, actively manifesting one while erasing the others was near impossible. After all, during the last hour, she had run through a plethora of challenges that pushed her significantly out of her comfort zone. Killing her friend, and having to act like a whore was tough. Ultimately, first losing her family, then her friend, for a husband that she doesn't even know that well didn't make things easier to process. Then, from her perspective, there was the chance of someone finding the dead body in her room. And to top off everything, now there was no going back to where she used to be from. Her family was nowhere in sight and they weren't there, and the uncle who she had just contacted recently was now almost dead. The glimmer of hope had now died off too. How selfish of her. Didn't she know how many people died because of her family's silliness? Especially for her dead aunt, just the number of soldiers lost in that war for a woman they didn't even know. The orphans and empty families left behind would never be mentioned in history books. Everyday people always suffered for the wealthy and powerful, that was a law that would never change about humans. At least I would like to be in the rich and powerful category, rather than suffer for others' pleasure. I didn't even bother acknowledging her actions as she pulled down my pants and pulled out my shaft, choosing to start speaking instead. So, I heard from one of my servants that you didn't let her in your room. Why might that be? I murmured casually. Just like that, she had been left speechless, reminding her status here and how her life was in my hands. I hope you understand how bad this makes it seem from my view. But even as I moved through the explanation about how this would make me suspicious and why she did that, most of my attention was on her body and her reactions. Her body, because she looked spectacular, wearing nothing under her dress as I pulled it up and unzipped her clothes, taking them all off. She was buxom and beautiful, with olive skin, large dark eyes, and long, thick black hair that falls in ringlets to the middle of her back. She had full lips, a husky voice, and round ripe breasts. All around, the view was delicious enough that a certain part of my body was working overtime to come back to life. I was a couple minutes into the discussion about the spread of the various political things when Ariane managed to break through her haze, enough to right herself on the table, her legs crossed, her arms around her chest in an attempt to hide her breasts, which was a bit late as far as her modesty was concerned. Despite her expression, charged with anger, it took another few minutes to gather enough presence of mind to speak. "Stop," she whispered, her voice coming out more vulnerable than she was planning if her follow-up expression was any indicator. "Was I not clear enough about the repercussions?" I countered casually. "I was hoping you will be able to keep all of it in mind. I could explain it to you again in detail, but that seems unnecessary. Someone of your intelligence should be able to handle it," I said, trying to play the misunderstanding angle about her. Until she managed to cut me off. "It's not that," she murmured with a hint of outrage. I had an amused expectation that her outrage was more about questioning her intelligence capability than anything else. After a deep breath, she continued with a freshly sparked outrage. "We need to talk about what you are doing." "What about it?" I said in an exaggerated casualness. "What about it?" she repeated, her anger tinged with shock. "I am not stupid. Is this some kind of sick game to you? I just killed Bara." "So what?" I asked. She wasn't even my favorite cum dump. "You," she spat. Fed with my casualness, her anger flared even more, enough to distract her from some peripheral details, like why her arms were wrapped around her chest. She pushed herself off the table and on her feet, her arms high with an angry gesture. But my attention was on her breasts, freed from their temporary support, tumbling temptingly. Tempting enough to make me adjust my plans. Initially, I had been planning to let her put on a show of anger until the edge wore off, but I stood up sharply instead. With my face just an inch away from hers, her next words lay forgotten. "Me?" I answered her with a distorted echo. I took a small step forward, and she took a larger one back. I took another, and this time, my desk, which had already been an excellent facilitator for our activities, turned out to be helpful once more and prevented her retreat. Before she could escape sideways, I put my arms on both sides of her, cutting her escape. She could have forced her way out, but as I expected, she didn't even try it. I leaned forward until I could feel her warmth over my skin, but avoided actual touch, choosing to hover a small distance away. "You want to know why I did what I did? That's why I know about you killing someone and even contacting your uncle behind my back and me not doing anything. There was no use hiding these things anymore. Ariane Martel was about to be mine, and I only needed to deliver her in a fragile emotional state. Do you know why wars continue to be fought? Or why your aunt was raped brutally while the assailant still had the blood of her children in their hands? This world is terrible and rewards terrible people. I didn't make the world, I only live in it." I didn't wait for her to reply and just continued my speech. "I can't change this cruel world, but I can make a place for people where it's not so bad. When you fell into my life, I thought you were just another naive girl, and it turned out to be true to a certain extent. I got closer to her, our noses almost touching and our bodies even closer than that. The dress she wore also was dropped to the ground, and so were my pants. Your aunt was raped and killed because you and your family were too weak to stop it, and because your father and his father before him made stupid mistakes. Do you want to go back to your family? Go, it doesn't matter to me, go and be married off to Viserys Targaryen, who is as mad as his father. Maybe your prayers to the seven gods will stop the same thing from happening to you. She looked at me with anger in her eyes, no longer able to hide her emotions. So what? Are you any better? Has any choice even been mine since I came to this place? Obviously not. I yelled out in mock anger. You don't know anything about the world, you are like a sheltered and spoiled child. Slap. The next thing I felt was the stinging sensation on my cheek, and tears rolled off her eyes. Seeing this, I sighed and touched her face gently. You have your choice right now, you can leave from here and everything between us will be forgotten, or you can stay here and become someone who will stay by my side. I promise you to no longer sleep around or do something behind your back. So, here it is, chose. As I spoke, emotions danced on her face: fear, panic, desperation, and most importantly, arousal. She shook her head helplessly, but at this point, she was already within my palm. I could crush her like a doll. I take the easy road and usually say that our marriage was because of convenience, but that would be a lie, I said even as I slid my fingers through her soft hair, but let my fingers hang limply. The answer is simple. I wanted it. I wanted you. Chapter 66, Control? You don't need it to. She shook her head helplessly, but at this point, she was already within my palm. I could crush her like a doll. I take the easy road and usually say that our marriage was because of convenience, but that would be a lie, I said even as I slid my fingers through her soft hair, but let my fingers hang limply. The answer is simple. I wanted it. I wanted you. Why, she said in the form of a fragile whisper, a touch away from crumbling. Her earlier outrage evaporated completely. All it would take was one bad answer to make her shatter completely. It's simple, I said even as I leaned further, my lips close to hers as well, using a husky voice. You're a beautiful, smart, determined, and passionate woman, and altogether, these qualities make you downright sexy, an object of desire, one that I needed to stay away from. I knew that you were trouble, and I wasn't exactly the knight in shining armor either. I could feel the drivel I was spewing was working as intended, breaking her already damaged balance completely. Can you imagine my torture? I continued as I hardened my hold on her hair. Her mouth opened, but the gasp she let out was a gasp that wouldn't be amiss in an erotic movie. Sharing the same halls with such a beauty, only to stay away because of all things like common courtesy. Can you blame me for taking the chance when I saw it? No, she whispered. Hypnotized by my monologue, she didn't seem to be entirely in her right mind as she gave her answer, but I wasn't a gentleman, so I used the opportunity to close the remaining distance between our bodies. I could see her mouth opening in alarm, but my lips smashed against hers, preventing her from saying anything. The kiss finally cut through the haze she had been under, but it was too late. Her hands found my chest, but it wasn't surprising for her to lack the power to push me back. My tongue, ravaging her mouth mercilessly, was an excellent distraction excuse. I put my hands on her chest as well, mirroring her latest action, though my intention was not to push her away. Instead, my fingers sank into her amazing globes once more, treating me with another portion of the amazing dessert I had already sampled. She tried to say something, but in the situation we were sharing, it came out as a mangled mess. In response, I squeezed her tits harder, converting it to a cry that I suppressed with my lips. Happy with the impact, I pulled back from the kiss even as I squeezed her tits mercilessly once more, forcing a boundless cry off her lips. This time it echoed off the walls, any guard passing by would have heard us. Somebody is enjoying herself, I said. And no, she tried to argue, but it wasn't effective after I squeezed her breast, forcing yet another moan off her. This isn't the time, my uncle is dying in the hospital and you just confessed to manipulating me during my stay here. Immediately after, one of my hands moved down caressing her folds, sopping wet with arousal. Don't lie to me, I ordered with a sharp smirk even as one of my fingers slipped inside her. You don't care about any of the events happening around. You killed your only friend instead of talking things out like the kind and sane person you like to portray yourself as. I'm not lying, she said, interrupted by a gasp and followed by another moan as I added 2 more fingers inside her, pumping her mercilessly. I didn't even bother to answer her question, choosing to lean forward instead. I sneaked my lips to the nook of her neck, nibbling her neck gently, an approach that contrasted greatly with the merciless pumping I had been delivering with my finger. You need to be punished for lying to your lord, I said after pulling back, though my hands were still at work. You need to pay better attention to your body because it seems to have no problem contradicting your words. I pulled my hand out of her tunnel, still glistening with her juices, and brought it to her face. Does it look like you're not enjoying it? But I don't. She murmured in confusion, for once failing to string a coherent argument together. Fuck it, She gave in, and I had no issues in using the opportunity to discreetly change position until I was standing between her legs, parted earlier during the assault of my fingers. Convincing rebuttal, I said mockingly. We should have met each other sooner, maybe you should write some of my speeches. You would be a star at it. Funny enough, she no longer even bothered resisting me. The insult against her capabilities worked much better in dispelling her confusion, replacing it with a spark of anger again. Unfortunately, she had missed the significance of our relative positioning, at least until I pushed my hips forward, sheathing myself in her wet tunnel once more. Wait. Let me think. What the fuck is up with this situation, she exclaimed. Naturally, I ignored it in favor of pushing my full length inside her, leveraging her looseness thanks to our earlier session, and the rest of her argument melted into a pleasure-filled cry. Come on, little Olive, I said even as I pumped inside her mercilessly. Isn't it a bit late to act like you are not enjoying it? We both know the truth of the matter, that the attraction is not a one-way street. Why are you bothering to deny it? No, it's not true, she replied with alarm. A display of panic even greater than the time I took her virginity, which would have revealed her attraction if I hadn't already engineered it in the first place. How could I be attracted to a man like you? Really? I said even as I pushed inside her sharply once more, my hands roaming freely over her body, leaving my mark over her olive skin. So you are telling me that your heart doesn't beat faster when we are like this? That your adrenaline doesn't go pumping and your brain is unable to think clearly due to the pleasure? What? How do you? She started before her explanation came to a sudden stop. I mean, no, of course not, she said, trying to recover her explanation, but it didn't work very well. Come on, I said even as I took her nipple between my finger, gently holding it for a moment before suddenly twisting, just hard enough to be painfully erotic. Didn't I already tell you that you are bad at lying? Now, the truth please. She tried to meet my eyes with a rebellious gaze, but as she was learning it, it was really hard to do against someone that was pumping her insides mercilessly. Yes, she murmured in defeat. I love you. When I see another woman with you it makes my blood boil, seeing my friend trying to get pregnant with your child made my mind go numb. See, was that too hard? I said even as I slid my hand between her hair, gently directing her to look into my eyes. Now, why don't you tell one of these stories to me? She looked reluctant at first, but when I tightened my grip on her hair warningly, her approach changed significantly. It was in the garden, and you were looking at one of the girls in there. She started, telling the story of how she had poisoned some poor gardening girl that I looked at. It wasn't a smooth tale, sometimes broken by her moans, but more often, by her gasps, as I continued to impale her through her explanation. I picked up the pace as she told the tale of how she used a self-made poison one of her cousins taught her how to make. It was easy and made from common flowers, some that I even had in the garden. Interestingly, she didn't try to lie, other than a few details which probably changed in her mind after the weeks that passed between the assassination. Or it was entirely possible that she had a repeat assassination and is confusing assassination details. I wouldn't blame her, she probably didn't want to remember things like these. Damn, that was an excellent scheme, I said when she finished the story while continuing to impale her. It's a miracle that I managed to keep myself from coming. Not inside, she yelped in panic, but her escape route was cut by my desk, so she kept her position. I haven't made a decision yet if I am gonna leave you. Come on, sweetie, I have already done this multiple times. What's the harm? I said cheekily, dismissing her talk about choices. Not inside, she repeated, this time firmer, encouraged by the levity of my reply. I kept my gaze even, and her determination was quick to show the signs of melting. After several seconds, I spoke. Okay, I'll warn you before the climax, I said. Promise me you'll pull back, she said, forcing the issue. This wasn't a real problem for her, she just wanted to be in control for once. Whatever you want, sweet Olive. I promise I'll pull out, I said, letting her have a false victory rather than an extended argument. She nodded, satisfied. Of course, I had no intention of giving even an illusion of victory without a payment. I grabbed her hands and led them towards my shoulders. Pull tighter, I said. She looked at me with reticence, but when my smile tightened, she was quick to comply. My reason for doing so was simple. I wanted her to take a more active role in our embrace. And while I would have preferred for her to ride me in a reverse cowgirl position in reckless abandon, I didn't want to lay down on the cold desk or ground. After another few minutes, my resistance was about to crumble. It's time for a cream pie, I said with a smirk as I grabbed her hips tight, cutting any chance of her escape. What? She was confused by the unfamiliar time, but a split second later she realized. Wait, she tried to warn, only to cut short when I slammed my lips against hers in another searing kiss. Shocked by the sudden intimacy, her resistance faltered for a moment, allowing me to fill her up. Realizing that the opportunity to escape had passed, she stayed passively, trying to hide her frustration. That was nice, I said casually as I pulled back, but only after making sure that I had deployed every last drop inside her. She looked at me with trembling eyes, and if I wasn't familiar with her expression, I might have mistaken it for being about to cry. Her frustration was easy to see, but the unsure enjoyment, I was able to catch only because of my familiarity. You came inside me, again, she said. Yes, I answered smugly, intentionally keeping close. But... You promised, she murmured. Looking at me with an emotionless look, finally understanding that she had no control all along. I lied, I answered smugly. An expression of outrage passed through her face, though mixing with her naked state and her marred skin, it just made her sexier. I leaned in for a quick peck, cutting off her angry statement. I have already explained it to you. I want you, and I will not let something as silly as your need to be in control prevent it. She tried to come up with an answer, but my shameless acceptance seemed to work better than anything else I might come up with. We have less than an hour until someone discovers the dead body in your room. We can continue to argue about how and why I chose to pump you full with my seed, or I can explain to you the way one can best dispose of a body. Your choice. My crassness seemed to push her towards another spiral of shyness. It took several seconds for her to answer. Body disposal, she murmured in defeat. While she tried to answer, I sat back once more, while she chose to sit on my desk once more, her legs firmly shut to prevent a glimpse into her nether lips, though she seemed to miss the fact that it also trapped my seed inside her. Once our lust calmed down, she looked at me and narrowed her eyes. So, is this it? For us. Our earlier embrace was confusing enough for her, and even if she was inclined to open up about her most dangerous secrets, she probably knew by now that I have quite a lot of info on her. If you wanted to? Sure, though there will be a whole situation and I will have to make it seem like you are fed up with me and decided to leave. Sigh, I don't know what to think of you. She said, looking down at my body. Are you a good guy or an evil guy? Good? Evil? Don't joke with me, the world isn't that simple. I snickered at her. Looking outside of the window again. For example, when your father went to save your Aunt Elia. How many people do you think had to die for that? How many more women were raped by the Dornish army? Don't lie to yourself, we both know that happened countless times. In this world there was no good or evil, there was simply power and those too weak to seek it. She looked down and sighed again. Well, I guess being with someone like you wouldn't be so bad. Since I wasn't looking at her, a smile bloomed on my face. What she wanted was control, but in reality, she just needed an easy mind. A place where she can sleep easily and had someone dependable and capable of extreme violence when required. Chapter 67, Discussion with Oberyn. Oliver POV. After finishing multiple sessions with Ariane, making my workplace office a mess and reeked of sex. We put our clothes on and walked outside of the room with our expressions showing nothing. The blood zombies guarding my door were as emotionless as always. Let's go and meet you, Uncle, I said, making it clear that there was no room for discussion on this decision. She nodded and followed along. Once we reached the healer's room, the doctor, or healer as they are called here. Technically they were just maesters that I gathered who hadn't formed their chains because I offered good money for them to come and work in my city. The person in charge bowed toward me. My lord, my lady, then he walked off, knowing what was going on here. We went towards the bed that Oberyn was on and his leg was messed up badly. At least he seemed to be awake and looked at me. If I can't fight anymore because of this, let me punch you in the face once. Sure, I agreed. But remember, I am not above beating up a cripple either. You are a cunt, Oberyn shook his head and looked at his niece. Ariane, tell me, is this man treating you well? If he isn't. He looked at me with maliciousness in his eyes. There is no need to pretend, uncle, she shook her head. Oliver already knows that we met secretly before. Oh. Oberyn was left speechless. Well, I would be the same after losing my leg for nothing and going through all this effort just to get found out in the end. Then, are you the man who planted the guards in Dorne to kill off Ariane? His questions were blunt, and even though he was strapped to a bed there was no fear in his eyes. He really was the Red Viper of Dorne, though he is no viper, humans have always been more dangerous than lizards. No, I answered, lying through my teeth while keeping a straight face. Lying was easier than people assumed, if it was hard, after all everyone does it. That would have been too risky of a move, and I never had the resources, nor did I know enough skilled people to do that. Oberyn nodded. He knew that as Oliver, I wouldn't have access to such skilled personnel. Even if I did, killing them like that would be a waste. But as Arthur, this body's father, it was a whole other deal. I knew many people skilled and disciplined enough to do that job. Bravos was a city where assassination thrived. But, I also wanted to ask something, how was someone able to just take Ariane from you so easily? My question made him frown, but he knew that if he didn't give me an answer then I wouldn't be obliged to tell him anything either. It was a complicated situation, Oberyn tried to say as little as possible, but once my eyes narrowed, he sighed. We were infiltrated deeply. A quarter of our guards were all enemy spies. The whole Martell family could have been killed that day, yet the attacker didn't do that, deciding to kidnap and confuse my niece. He looked at me suspiciously, and I could see where he was coming from. All of the signs pointed towards me. After all, Davos was saved while the whole incident was happening and he met with Arianne. This all led to me getting most of the benefits. So someone like Doran Martell undoubtedly noticed this, but the illogical part of it comes, where would I find people like that? Who would assume that I am Arthur reborn through the body of his son? That would be madness. The logical conclusion was that there was more than met the eye here. I believe in Doran's logic to be my perfect cover, the man who did nothing after his sister's death and waited for the right moment. He will make an obvious and logical conclusion. Then I will use that against him. Yeah, the security in your palace sucks, I agreed with Oberyn, and that made him look suspiciously at me. What would I know about the security in Dorne? Quite a lot. My guards were able to infiltrate and free Davos. That was easier than expected. You know that makes you look guilty, right? Questioned Oberyn. A mask of calmness hid his real feelings. Well, while Davos escaped with the first bodyguard, the chances of someone seeing him were almost certain. If I refuted this fact, and the truth came out, then why would this enemy want Davos out of confinement? No, it was better to admit these things now and later have the whole chaos after that blamed onto someone else. Maybe Varys? He was always suspicious and no one trusted him. I know how that makes me look, I admitted. But right now, lying to you guys wouldn't lead me anywhere. Also, Arianne's marriage to me wasn't something I forced her into. That was the truth. I never explicitly forced her, I only made the situation seem desperate and that she would die if she didn't marry me. She decided to not die. Then what about the letter that your man sent? He asked, and this time it seemed like he wanted an answer no matter what. Undoubtedly Oberyn and Doran had shit their pants once they saw the letter that I had Davos send them. There was information on how they wanted Arianne to marry Viserys. That would sink Dorne to the ground if it ever came out or Robert Baratheon learned about it. But due to my silver hair, it made me look like a Targaryen. So appearing in front of a half-drunk Robert wasn't a good idea. That letter was a warning, I reasoned. If Dorne interfered with my business, then that would spread all over the Seven Kingdoms. Though the marriage with Arianne has made that threat null. I could see the gears in Oberyn's head turn. Slowly he was piecing together the truth and what had really happened in Dorne. From his view, it must seem like such a strange mystery, and slowly but surely he was piecing things in place and the situation would start to make more sense. My money had been on Doran figuring it out once he got the news, but Oberyn was quite smart too. Arianne stood by my side, she now had chosen who she would be with during these hard times. She made that decision during a moment of lust and pleasure, as expected from a naive girl like her. Medieval times are such a mess. If Arianne had been a modern woman, she would have divorced me by now and taken half my stuff, and had a child just so I would have to support her financially too. My mind is wandering while waiting for Oberyn to say something. Also, I calculated when it would be good to start using gunpowder and arm my soldiers with rifles. It should be later on, as I don't want to get that technology stolen, because if it got stolen, welp, say goodbye to all the plans. Every one of them would be useless. So I had to be careful with how my influence spread ideas around and squish the dangerous ambitions of people. Well, your explanation makes sense. So Oberyn started talking, before he was interrupted by a loud bang, signaling the opening of the door, a soldier breathing heavily and panicked. Lord Oliver! He called out, something disastrous has happened. A/N, here are the psychological tricks that Oliver used. 1. Gaslighting, making an outrageous scenario where the truth is so unbelievable so he only tells a part of it. It's like a real magician appearing in a YouTube video, everyone would just assume that those were cool effects. Normal people would never think that he was a real magician. I am saying normal here because there are people who believe in flat earth, so yeah. 2. Arianne's decisions. She has made no decision, and the one she truly made was during sex. Which is a time where the mind doesn't work at best capacity, you will agree with a lot of things at the heat of the moment. Oliver used this and had Arianne make her choice in those moments filled with lust. But it wasn't a real choice, and it was orchestrated so she thought it was her choice. Think of it as asking someone in hype anime moments if he wants to go and see the next anime form in a cinema. They would agree at the impulse of the moment, even if it's shit. P.S. So in general, don't make decisions when your mind is influenced by hype feelings or when you are horny. Did a lot of mistakes due to the latter, don't be like me. Chapter 68, Too Old. Oberyn Martell POV. Lord Oliver. The guard entered and called out, something disastrous has happened. I saw the look on Oliver's face, it didn't change one bit. Now even a twitch on his face of panic or fear. What a scary man. It wasn't because he wasn't able to feel fear, but because he had such control over his own emotions, that made him a very scary man. People like me were a little reckless, and our bravery was foolhardy, I knew that inevitably I would die in some battle. Though by then dying wouldn't be too bad, as I won't be able to even get my tool up. Rather die out there in battle than wait for my body to rot. So, what happened? Asked Oliver as he walked towards the panicked man and put a hand on his shoulder. Don't worry, you will get rewarded for your speed at arriving here so fast. Your family will get a small manor to live on and you will become head of the guards. Yes sir. The guard yelled back, his exhaustion all but forgotten. News has come that Lord Davos has been kidnapped by pirates from the Three Sisters. It was quite amazing seeing how fast the guard's demeanor changed, from being panicked and worried to having a bright look and being expectant for the future. People like Oliver made twisting someone's mind and manipulation seem like an art form. But once again, a chill went down my spine at the silver-haired man's demeanor. He looked worried but smiled in the end. You are a good man, he complimented the guard. Go and notify the guard captain, I will be taking care of some matters. Some two-bit pirate dared to kidnap my people? I will raze their islands to the ground. The Three Sisters were known to be ruled by pirates and have deep connections with bravos. Yet Oliver made it seem like it was an obvious fact that he would destroy them all. He looked at me and smiled apologetically. Sorry about this, but it seems like I have some more matters to take care of. With that, he walked off with the guard, and for a second I contemplated that the silver-haired man might not be so bad. He seemed like the kind old guy who would offer help to the people on the road without asking anything in return. One of his people got captured and he was willing to go to war for them. This was a powerful message to his subordinates. It declared that no matter who or how small, as long as you worked for him, then no one would dare mess with you. Even pirates who hadn't been attacked by Targaryens would feel Oliver's wrath now. He isn't such a bad guy, is he? Arianne smiled while looking at the doors her husband walked out of. That was when I saw the look on her face. Those eyes were the eyes of someone who was head over heels in love with him. How? Not even a day before we had met, and while she didn't hate Oliver at the time, she was suspicious of him. Yet now? So fast? I knew that anything I said to her would be the same as saying it to Oliver. Yes, I agreed with her. Not daring to test what my niece would do if anything bad about him came out of my mouth. Then how do you feel about coming to Dorne for some time in the future? Your father misses you dearly and doesn't want your last memory of him to be something bad. Arianne smiled at me gently and sat on the bed looking at my leg. There is no need, uncle, this is the only place I am safe. Well, I am sure that Doran will instate some new. As I said, I got interrupted by her before even finishing. Her smile only widened a little, it was a kind smile on her face, but why did it feel so creepy? Only here I am safe, uncle. Oliver can offer the protection Dorne never could. Also, he told me about my father's plan to marry me off to Viserys, the second coming of the Mad King. Hearing that, I got a little worried. Arianne here seemed to have been taking some things Oliver said as facts. No one knew what Viserys was like at all. The young man was hiding and no one knew what he even looked like except his silver hair. There are no people that say. I know who to believe, uncle, she intervened once more. Do you think that I would trust Oliver so easily? He has given me the facts to prove his words true. Did he? That would mean that he either had a very close spy in the Targaryen children, and that was bad, or he could be lying to Arianne. His words seemed to be always like an absolute truth. What did he do to Arianne to make her think like this? I didn't know which was worse, and for someone like Oliver, he left Arianne alone with me, knowing that previously we had been in contact and exchanged information. Yet, he just left us like this again. This just showed that he was confident that no matter what, Arianne wouldn't be swayed by my words. How annoying. This guy is very dangerous and troublesome. My anger spiked and I winced as pain shot through my leg due to the tightening of the muscles. I will never be able to fight again like I used to. An injury like this had made me lose my speed even when fully recovered. There will be some awkwardness during movement. Jonaran POV. As one got old, the less they slept, that was what I noticed. So here I was, in the small council, everyone telling what they had found. The Targaryen children are still hiding, even though Willem Darry's death has been confirmed. Sadly the news traveled too slow and by the time we know their location, they will move, explained Varys. His emotionless eyes and small smirk made the eunuch look like a creepy puppet. People kicking them out of places so they can't stay in for too long is the thing saving them. Is that so? I asked, looking at the cockle spider straight in the eyes. Recently your news hasn't been too good, maybe. I didn't finish my words, but I had learned all these years in the small council that handling these rats wasn't like the people in the Vale. These guys were all scheming rats and snakes. Except for Peter, Stannis, and the Master of Laws, Jon Royce. The others were untrustworthy. Trusting a snake not to bite you would be better than these spineless folk. I promise to try harder next time, Lord Hand. The eunuch bowed his head slightly. TCH, these people, they sure had no shame in it all. I couldn't replace the spider, there was no man with as big of a spy network as the eunuch. If there were, then the owners of such a network were good at hiding it. Anyway, Varys and Pycelle were people I didn't trust at all. Though they were outnumbered in the small council, that didn't mean that they couldn't cause harm. After all, they served the Mad King, and although they serve Robert well from what it seems, they would also serve Viserys Targaryen if he came with an army and took over King's Landing. Lord Hand, this time Pycelle called me. There has been a letter sent by Lord Oliver Redhawk, quite the remarkable young man. Heard that he took after his father, some of his new merchanting tactics are nothing short of brilliant. Get to the point, I interrupted the senile old man. Everyone knew that House Redhawk had truly grown powerful. If Arthur was alive he would be proud of his legacy. Well, the old man seemed unsure of what to say at first. Oliver Redhawk has said that the Three Sister Islands have kidnapped his right-hand man, and he would like the king's permission to hunt down the pirates and kill them all. Damn, that. I sighed, rubbing my brows in frustration. Another war, something that the realm didn't need. Also, wars weren't cheap, they cost both gold and working men. Give me the letter. After taking the latter and getting a quick read, I had to stop myself from sighing loudly. I was too old for these shit games. Chapter 69, Pit of Vipers. It didn't take even a month for the Three Sisters to be surrounded. The armada of ships that I had spent so hard building now showed its might. Even though it has taken a lot of resources, these ships will be very useful. Though I had gotten the idea from the British Kingdom in my past life, I knew it would be effective even before I started building the first ship. Having a lot of ships was essentially the reason the British Kingdom dominated during most of its history. I took a lot of inspiration from my last life medieval history. Whether it was Sun Tzu's arts of war, Britain's battleships, Napoleon's divide and conquer tactics. It didn't matter at the end of the day, I will use them all. Even Hitler had his moments of military genius, which was impressive for a failed art student. Though he had good military tactics he also had bad ones which I will discard. For example, Russia in my last world had always been a problem to conquer, whether it was Napoleon or Hitler, none could take it. I won't make the same mistake as them, so the North and Westeros will have to be left for last. A soldier came from the raft of the ship and got on his knee, presenting me with a letter. Lord, the pirates have requested a meeting with you. They have also said that Davos release. Refuse them all, I interrupted the man. The pirates either unconditionally surrender or we crush them, kill their families and rape their wives. There are no other options here for them, we are the stronger ones and we aren't on equal footing to negotiate. Yes, Lord. The man got up and went to send the order to the other ships. Wait. I stopped him before he could walk off. He turned around and looked at me. Kill the messengers. Send their head with their eyes gouged out back to the enemies. Leave one man alive though to send the message, also cut that man's cock off. This was a medieval world, I couldn't be soft on my enemies because they won't be soft on me. It could lead to Davos dying, which would be a shame. But it doesn't matter. He was replaceable now, sure I like to tell him that he wasn't replaceable, and I will tell the same to the other man that comes after him. A man's life for an island was a small sacrifice to make unless of course, that man was me. At the end of the day, each great thing had darkness beneath it. Just like Einstein, the genius also married his cousin. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow is. Davos' capture had been planned, and I didn't want anyone finding that out. As long as the light was too bright, no one would notice the darker things. After I win this war, no one would care too much about how it started. Anyway, it will take my enemies at least a couple of days until they croak, but I didn't favor a siege scenario as I will have to feed my men too, and doing that at sea was very expensive. In this world not only was transportation slow by ship but also someone like the Reach might secretly sabotage my food transportation. The Redhawk family had quite a bit of enemies and I didn't want to test myself and see if I could stay a step ahead of them at all times. The soldiers in this ship had been handpicked by me. I didn't necessarily trust them too much, but I did trust that they loved their family that lived in London very deeply. That love could be used against them and to keep them in line. Dear, you have that thoughtful look on your face. Is something wrong? A melodic voice came from behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know that it was Arianne Martell, or I guess it's Arianne Redhawk now. Yes, I am worrying about Davos, he is someone irreplaceable that I trust. She smiled when I told her that. Some people always put their trust in you when you just speak differently from what they are used to. Jonaran POV. It was unusual for Robert to be in a small council meeting. What was even more unusual was the excited look he had on his face. Okay, you scheming half-wits. Robert addressed the council. Why don't you tell me the situation? John here just told me the gist of things. But it seems like Arthur's son has declared war on some pirates. I would criticize Robert's choice of words if we were alone. But I won't do so in front of other people. Now Robert was a king, and he couldn't be undermined in front of others. While I knew he wouldn't do anything like whip me or cut my head off as any normal king would have. I didn't want to be the cause for the other vipers in this city to start entering through the cracks. Though in the council meeting, there was another problem. Robert was currently drunk, everyone here could tell that. My king, Varys, the master of whispers, was the first one to speak. His voice was like the whisper of a snake. Lord Redhawk's actions were unbecoming. As far as we know, his most trusted advisor was kidnapped. Young Royce, the master of law, snorted in annoyance. Serves those pirates right, better show them not to mess with us. He was a loyal man, and I understood that House Royce suffered quite a lot from the pirates in the Three Sisters. Technically the Three Sisters Islands belonged to the Vale, but it was taken over by pirates. As Lord Protector of the Vale, I understood things better than anyone else here. I knew if Oliver single-handedly took care of the pirates, it would paint a bad picture if they didn't give him the islands or at least a part of them. As expected of Arthur's kid, Robert on the other hand was clearly not worrying about any of these things. He had a reminiscent look in his eyes, smiling gently as he looked at an empty cup. He then yelled out, "Wine!" A squire entered with a goblet of wine and filled the king's cup. No one said anything, it was clear that Robert was in one of his drunken stupors. "Damn it!" the king yelled out in anger, throwing the cup on the ground, shattering the wine-filled glass in 1,000 pieces. "Arthur, that harlot! He had to go and die so early. You promised me war. We were going to fight together." Robert was mad, there were many things that were left unsaid. But still, no one said anything. I gazed at my surrogate son with a sad look. Robert was no longer the man he once used to be. Arthur's death, one of his best friends especially, hit him hard. While Robert and Ned were like brothers. If he had to choose a best friend, Robert Baratheon would say that Arthur was his best friend. The men's love for battle was equal. I still remember the night Arthur took down many people, even while drunk he had never lost. Truly, an undefeated knight. I too respected the martial power Arthur used to possess. But now wasn't the time for such tangents. Right now we were standing in a pit of vipers. Showing weakness wouldn't be a good thing to do. Chapter 70, All people die eventually. Jonaran. In the end, the meeting was finished without saying anything important. No one had dared to bring the sensitive situation up. So after some war talk, everything was finished. Young Royce and Peter Baelish, two people from the Vale I trusted, came with me as we walked out. In the end, no one dared to say anything about Lord Redhawk going to war without the king's official permission. Said Peter. Like always, his intelligence shines through. Something at this scale would be considered at the same stage as rebelling. Yeah, I agreed on that. Young Royce only nodded, listening to our conversation with great interest. Peter on the other hand suddenly stopped, and his face showed that he suddenly came to a realization. Wait, would someone like Lord Redhawk even do something like this? Endanger his whole house for some man? Sir Davos might be his right-hand man, but not someone to risk his whole family over. Yet, now that I thought about it, why would Oliver do something like this? Though I haven't met the young man personally, I knew Arthur well enough to know that he wouldn't raise his kids to be this rash. Unless Oliver didn't do this without the king's permission. Wait. Did he get some kind of fake letter or something similar to show that the king had allowed the war? Everything would make more sense now. I looked at Peter and he nodded. A worried look also was apparent on his face, he too had come to the same realization. We must tell Robert about this immediately. I turned around, hurriedly walking back to the council chambers. Wait. Peter suddenly grabbed my arm, stopping me from going any further. Baelish, it seems a small lord like you must have gotten more reckless after joining the small council. Young Royce pulled out his sword and pointed it at Peter. Let go right now. As someone who had seen war and death in the eyes, young Royce made quite the intimidating figure. Peter glances at him with fear, looking at the sword and gulping. My lord, this wouldn't be a good idea. After all, for someone to fake a king's signature, it means that someone had to be close to the thing multiple times. Only a very small group of people have that leisure. Only the small council. I now understood why he stopped me. If I went back to Robert right now, some other council members were still around and would overhear us. We would be giving the culprit a hint. Looking at Peter, I had no idea what to do. So, what would you suggest we do now? Peter smiled and let go of my hand. Leave this to me. Hearing his reassuring words, I smiled back. You have grown quite a lot, Peter. I am glad to have someone like you looking behind me. There are quite a lot of backstabbers in this place. His smile only got wider at my words. I am glad you think of me like that, my lord. Oliver POV. The war was over before it even began, while the pirates might have been skilled at robbing ships and sailing. Warfare was completely different. I had 50 ships with trebuchets mounted on them. The rock-flinging weapons sunk the enemy ships like they were flies. After that, my men sailed by the debris and used bows and crossbows to shoot down anyone who had survived. It was a massacre and the three sister islands were under my control before the sun even set. I observed this carnage from the deck of my ship. Now there was no need for me to get personally involved in wars. People would do the job for me, and my overwhelming number of soldiers and ships outnumbered the enemy 110. The cities were pillaged and raped, people were killed. This was all that went on in the islands, even though I couldn't see what was happening with my eyes. I know what was going on. War would always be brutal like this. I have to always make sure to not be on the losing side. Because losers are never treated well by the world. Aren't you worried? Asked Ariane, who had stood next to me the whole time. She had a brave face, but I could see through her act. No, I answered her simply. War is just a battle of numbers. Most of the time, the bigger army will win. What about the times when they don't? She asked once again, interlocking her fingers with mine and squeezed my hand. I didn't do anything to push Ariane away. Instead I just reassuringly smiled at her. This war's result has already been decided. They are pirates, not people with reason. None of them could make their civilization work without piracy. Sprinkling in some lies and truth in my words made her relax. Also, I demonized the enemy. There was no need for Ariane to know that war also involved children and women too. Men fought, but the elderly, women, and children would always be the victims to the side. Someone like Ariane coming to that realization would make her into someone self-aware. She doesn't need to have things like self-awareness. After all, where would I benefit from her having that? It was way easier to have her continue to be naive. When night came about, the fires in the island quilted down. I still just stood on the deck of my ship, looking at the island. Though in reality, I was looking through the eyes of my hawk that flew above the islands. The battle scale was heavily tilted on my side. I also made sure that no child of any leader escaped. I didn't want any of them to come back for revenge. Blood flew through the castles like a river, my orders were carried out and even the servants of the places were gathered in the yards. They too were killed, just in case, someone from the leaders' families was disguised as servants. My orders were carried out and there was nothing unexpected. I had taken into account all of the situations that might happen, even the most outrageous ones. Not even an hour later, the island was up in flames. All the corpses were burned and the people looked in terror as their loved ones burned and turned to ashes. I looked at all of this coldly from my new castle. Ariane was next to me and looked terrified. It was easy to see that while she boasted of bravery, wanting to go on adventures and fight wars. But seeing the reality of war had broken her once again, tears streamed down her face. Still, this was nothing in comparison to how many Dornish died for Elia Martell. Life was like this to those without power and naive enough to be used by the powerful. Telling her how many people died because of her aunt would be counterproductive. Instead, Ariane should come to that realization herself. That way she can feel smart and think that everything she knew was real. Only then can I get what I want from her. Whether the first child we will have together is a boy or girl depends. But I need a boy because in the worst case scenario I wouldn't want to be reborn in a girl's body. Though I would do that if I was desperate, it wasn't my first go-to method. Not only were females weaker physically, which would be a detriment, but also people wouldn't listen to a female as much as a man during these times. My lord, the royal fleet has been sighted, one of my guards informed me. As I looked at him, he gazed down, not daring to meet my eyes. Thanks, Herald, I called him by name. Being a tyrant wasn't the right thing to do. After all, statistically, tyranny would always fail eventually. Now you should go and enjoy a drink. Tell the men that today we will be feasting. He smiled at that thankfully. Thank my lord. Another soldier came in with a box in his arms, interrupting Harold. Lord Davos, his head was found mounted on a spike in one of the villages. Oh, so Davos was dead? Well, that's a shame, but his death wasn't in vain. He had given me so much new territory. Though I guess this wasn't exactly new territory. With those thoughts in mind, I still made myself appear a little sad, but after that, my face hardened. Send what you can find of his body and prepare to send it to his family. With that said, the soldiers nodded and walked away. Ariane gave me a comforting hug and I reciprocated. A small tear came out of my eye and fell on her exposed shoulder. I made sure she would feel the tears. Davos had been exceptionally useful, and he could have been even more useful in the future. This truly was a sad turn of events. But still, nothing to whine about, all people die eventually. Some do so sooner and some die later. Did it make a difference what time they died? At the same time, on the other side of the island, Robert's ships landed and the king himself stepped into the docks. Looking around he only saw Red Hawk soldiers all around the docks. It seems like we were too late for the war, said Jaime Lannister. He was amused seeing the king so disappointed. Another king's guard came forward too and asked. What should we do with Lord Oliver Redhawk, my king? After all, he did go and wage war without your permission is the same as rebellion. Jamie wouldn't call himself smart and he rarely was the most well-read person in the room. But even he could tell that this Kingsguard had just said something that he was clearly bribed to say. Robert stared intently at the Kingsguard who spoke. What did you just say? With that question, Robert seemed calm. But the air around them felt frozen, and immediately the Kingsguard understood that he had just said something very, very bad. Arthur Redhawk was Robert's friend, and accusing the man's son of treason in front of the king wasn't a good idea. Chapter 71, Redhawk. Oliver POV. As the war, if it could even be called that, was over, I and Ariane fucked in the bedroom of the previous ruler. Now I knew she was a little sad and all that, but I needed a child from her soon. Or else she would start outliving her usefulness and I didn't want to have to kill the only link I had with Dorne. But I knew she still had ties with some of her cousins, the Sand Snakes. While currently, their conversations are mostly about normal things, I knew that it had the potential to develop into something more. I don't want a viper in my bed. Looking at her naked body laying on the bed, I contemplated killing her. I could just use a body double and have a child with her. It wasn't like people of this age could do DNA testing. As long as my child had slightly Dornish looks, then it should be okay. But no, that would be taking unnecessary risk. I will wait till the end of the year for Ariane to get pregnant. If she doesn't, well, noble ladies slip off the stairs and break their necks all the time. I closed my eyes and shared the vision with my hawk, which was following Robert's army that had just arrived. I already knew about the war order being a fake one, but I didn't know who sabotaged me. But in the end, it didn't matter too much to me. Because of the fake order, I had been able to start a war and had the king's permission. It wasn't my fault the king was incompetent. Everyone knew that it wasn't my fault, and I doubt Robert would do anything too drastic as I was Arthur's son. My previous self had a pretty good relationship with Robert and he was someone Robert respected deeply. I was sitting on the Three Sisters' leader seat in his castle. With a helmet on my head to hide my silver hair, I waited. Robert and his army came through not even a minute later, and with Jamie next to him, the king looked at me with a serious look. I heard you went and fought against the Three Sisters pirates, is that true? I nodded, knowing that Robert didn't like scheming people, so I had to make sure I didn't appear like one of them in front of him. Yes, Your Grace. I already have the confirmation from you. Taking out a paper, I got up from my chair. I walked up to him, stood straight, and looked Robert in the eyes while showing him the document. He didn't say anything and just looked at me. I had made sure to hide my silver hair so it didn't trigger any memories of rigor. But who knew how this fat drunk might act? I am not mad at you, he said softly. You have your father's eyes, how could I be mad at you? You even gaze at everyone the same way, with the confidence that you could beat everyone in the room. I smiled at that. It isn't just confidence, my grace. He knew he could beat everyone in the room. Ha 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 ha. Robert wheezed as he laughed. You are damn right. Even if Arthur was in front of a dragon and he wouldn't budge. That damn fool, he just went and died before me. He always said I drank too much. No one dared refute me when I became king, but he just didn't seem to care. Well, I didn't care at the time about his authority, so he was right on that one. As Arthur, I had a lot of influence. He was known as the undefeated for a reason. Never lost a fight, whether with a sword or in war. I had wanted to still have that body even when the canon story came around, but sadly things didn't play out like that at all. Still, though, it wasn't that bad, and I now at least knew that my spell worked. Father was quite a lot of things. Everyone close to father told him to not go in the Greyjoy rebellion. His body was failing him and he was sick. Well, it was due to overusing magic and losing a huge chunk of lifespan. But no one needed to know that, so I painted his actions in better scenery. But he refused to run away from a fight. That pride and loyalty killed him. Robert looked on with emotional eyes, but he stopped any tears from coming out. Yes, Arthur was always loyal. He died because of my orders. I shouldn't have summoned him at the time. And I won't punish his son for such silly things. He took the paper off my hand and ripped it apart. Oliver Redhawk, you should be rewarded for taking care of the pirates living so close to us. In the end, the relationship I had cultivated as Arthur with Robert wasn't for nothing. But still, though, there was another thing bothering me. Someone was after me and I didn't know who it was. My spy network didn't know either. These lands, since a lot of men died here. I would like to have a part of these lands. I said to Robert directly. At least build a port, from which the income will go to their families. The king smiled. You can just not pay them. I could see the mischievous look in his eyes. He was testing me. Those men died for me. I will do everything in my power to compensate their families and their children to at least get the opportunities they need. That was all a big lie. I didn't even know their families, so how could I pay them? Unless they were some knight or noble, no one knew where they even came from. Even if I did, I am not wasting money on them. Because if I start compensating for one, then everyone will start wanting that money. Plus there will be some scammers amongst them. Yet, no way I was doing any of that. It just sounded like a lot of trouble. But Robert's smile couldn't get any wider as he put a hand on my shoulder. Good, you manage them. They were just some pirate islands after all. They technically were under Jonaran of the Vale, but I wasn't going to correct him. I doubted the drunk Kong knew just whose land was where, especially with little places like this. Jonaran wasn't here to correct him here either. So I decided to keep quiet. In reality, I would have been okay with just one of the islands. At worst I wanted a port in the islands, but, well, this was why you shouldn't choose someone to be a king just because he can hit hard. Or else you get incompetent ones like these. I got on one knee. I am thankful for your generosity, your grace. Ha, you're thankful to me? I am just telling you to take care of the islands in my place because it would be too annoying to deal with them. He said amusingly, turning around and declaring. In the name of Robert Baratheon, I declare the three sister islands as territory of House Redhawk and they will be managed by Oliver Redhawk, his son after him, his grandson, and so on. Just how drunk was this guy? I don't think you were even supposed to go around saying things like that. A king's words hold a lot of weight around here. I think he was just caught in the moment. Arthur had been pretty badass, like beating people when he was drunk, though I wasn't drunk at the time. So reality isn't anywhere near as impressive. In reality, I had just pummeled some drunk guys who were so hammered they could barely stand up. Still though, now that wasn't too important. Instead, I had to find out who went and tried to sabotage me. Having unknown enemies would get me killed if I wasn't careful. Chapter 72, Suspicious Activity. Oliver POV. On the biggest castle on the Three Sisters, a festive mood was about as the rest of the islands cried over their lost ones. Robert treated me quite nicely so I threw a feast to his honor and his army on the same island we had just butchered people in. Now, these lands were mine and I could throw feasts here. Also, I wanted to keep the Fat King's eyes concentrated on the drinking and not what was going on behind the scenes. That was the main reason. He kept mentioning Arthur so much that it became annoying after some time and I just nodded and replied politely. Ha ha ha. Robert touched a servant and she looked at the ground with despair. He smiled, not noticing any of this. Hello there pretty lady, wanna see a kingly cock? He was drunk, so he probably didn't notice. But I could tell that the woman seemed disgusted at the mention of sleeping with the king. Any other woman would have dreams of having Robert fall in love with her and make her queen, but this one was different. Her husband probably or someone dead to her died in the war against my army. But here she was just after the war serving the men that killed someone she loved. This was the fate of the losers. History always hadn't been kind of the losers, no one was kind to them. I remember one battle in my last world where the winning army castrated tens of thousands of enemy soldiers as a sign of victory. Now that strategy was quite remarkable. No man would ever dare fight an enemy like that, especially adults. Though sadly that wasn't a viable option for me to use in a war as it would lower my own army's morale. If I was a Dothraki, then it might have worked and even developed into a tradition. It would make the Dothraki even more fearsome, and only the Unsullied would dare fight them. It would be crude in modern warfare and earn you a bad reputation which would result in many enemies banding together behind the reason of ending your tyranny. But in a medieval world like this, it would work very well. Fa ha ha ha. Robert laughed as he grabbed the despaired woman and brought her in his embrace. She seemed repulsed by him, but in the end, she relented. Come in here pretty lady, let me show you how the Westerosi men fuck. I wondered. Did she have a child? Because there was no other reason she would degrade herself like this. Plus the woman was quite pretty, she seemed to me in her mid or early 20s so she probably was already someone's wife by her age. It is always amazing how humans can act in different situations. I admired a woman willing to do so much just for her child. Still, though, I won't help her, admiration of her and helping were two different things. No good deed goes unpunished. Getting up, I decided to take a breather from the party. When I noticed one of the King's Guard, Jaime Lannister, following me. What was his game here? Well, if he wanted a fight, I could cut his head. In a sword duel, he might beat me, but in a death match, Jaime stood no chance. Just a little bit of hypnotic magic to slow down his reaction and I would slit his throat before he could even react. After I walked to the balcony of the castle, Jaime tailed me all the way there. I could see the city below, men were still dragging corpses and putting them in a pile. Those would all be burned so no one caught any diseases, also it was for one of my blood rituals. Magic worked in mysterious ways, but I wanted to enhance my hawk and try to unlock some more abilities. As I leaned on the balcony, I knew Jaime had approached behind me stealthily, trying to hide the sound of his steps with the noise from the feast. I saw all of this through the eyes of my hawk that was looking at us from one of the roofs. Are you going to keep following me? I asked, without needing to turn around and look at him. He seemed a little surprised that I noticed him, not knowing that my eyesight was better than any human could ever achieve. Plus I was observing from the literal eyes of a hawk, and in comparison, it could see what was happening in the forest close to the town with extreme detail even though the night was pitch dark. I heard a lot about your father, he started talking in an arrogant tone. Standing next to me and leaning on the balcony. Arthur was a great man, I saw him a couple of times from afar too. He was great with a sword too. But what about you? People seem to praise you, but to me, it seems like you are just riding on the cocktails of your father. Oh, so he was here to banter with me. Also was that a sense of jealousy I was feeling from him? Telling me just how great my father was and then trying to compare me to him. Yeah, it was a low-handed insult. What about you? Your father is the mighty Tywin Lannister, and yet here we are, both not living to our father's potential. Then again, one of us isn't a glorified bodyguard. Unlike what he thought, I wasn't jealous of Arthur. After all, I was the one accomplishing those things. If this had been the modern world, I wouldn't have even bothered responding to such an insult, but in this world respect and power meant everything. I won't allow Jaime Lannister to insult me, and if I just walked away that would have made me seem weak. He was angry and clenched his fist, but he didn't walk off either and just forced himself to smile and try to calm down. You are right. We both don't live up to our potential and... You don't. I interrupted him, he looked at me confused and I clarified. You are the one not living up to your potential. Since you are just a glorified bodyguard with a life oath to protect the king. I can still go and do things, you can't. So don't put us on the same level. Kingslayer. His hand stealthily went to the handle of his sword and his jaw clenched. In the night no normal human would be able to see that small movement as he hid his hand by using his white cloak. He looked at me like a lion wanting to pounce on his prey. Sadly for him, I was an eagle, not someone he could touch while standing on the ground. He had a long sword and I had a knife under my sleeve. I was confident in pulling faster and slitting his throat before he could pull out his sword. A sword was too slow in the draw in comparison to a dagger or hidden knife. I walked towards him calmly and put my hand on his shoulder, whispering in his ear. Next time pick your opponents carefully or you might lose a hand. Kingslayer. That last word seemed to put him on edge. But I knew Jaime wasn't powerful at all, even with that strong last name he wasn't anything special. His sister was on the other hand more powerful than him and had her brother by the balls. In conclusion, Jaime was a cat that followed, not a lion with big ambitions. Sometimes it doesn't matter who your father was, weak people create strong men and strong men create weak people. The cycle continues so, just like Tywin had with his weak father which made the new lord of House Lannister strong, and Jaime had his strong father which made him weak. Thankfully I was out of that whole cycle. My children whether they were weak or strong didn't matter. As I walked back, I was looking through the vision of my eagle. Which was when I saw something interesting. The king's guard that had slandered me in front of the king when they landed here, was surrounded by a group of peasants with pikes. My hawk landed on a roof close to the confrontation so I could hear what they were talking about. Who are you? Asked the king's guard. Looking around panicked as he pulled out his sword. The peasants looked at him with fear and stumbled about, some pulled out hay forks and tried to attack the king's guard. Clang! The man stopped the hay forks, but one of the prongs stabbed his wrist. He was unused to fighting against such a weapon and accidentally let himself be hit. Ag! He yelled out in pain, dropping his sword. As soon as he did that, the peasants stormed him and stabbed, slashed, and bashed him to death. Now, this was very suspicious. Why would a group of peasants attack a king's guard? The stories that they told about knights would keep any man away due to fear. It also didn't seem like they were starving, so it wasn't desperation. On top of that, what was a king's guard doing walking all alone in a town? To me, it just seemed like a cover-up. Someone paid the king's guard to talk bad about me and was just covering his tracks. Peasants would also do almost anything for a couple of gold dragons, that was pretty much more money than they would ever see in their lives. What I could conclude out of this was that the man who paid the king's guard called him to meet and had the peasants kill him. To anyone else, it might seem like an accident, the man was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But to me, it was suspicious of what had happened. Because I have pulled schemes similar to this to eliminate any loose ends. Whoever was trying to cover their tracks had a good head on their shoulders. But they also had resources. Now the only person I could think of was either Varys or Peter Baelish. The latter though didn't have the resources yet as he hadn't had enough time to steal from the kingdom's coffers. So Varys was the one most likely doing this, especially since he knew just how powerful the House of Redhawk was. We could dominate the seas. So his plan with Little Griff would end up in shambles if when he tried to cross the sea my armada of 1,000 ships decided to stop them. So Varys had a motive too. But this whole thing was still covered in mystery since I didn't know this for sure and never really saw Varys being involved in this. So there was still a chance it was someone else, even Olenna wasn't out of the picture yet. She probably held a grudge for what I had done to the Reach as Arthur, this body's father. The Game of Thrones. It always drew people in with their schemes and plots. Sadly for the participants, I was a paranoid guy who would rather see the heads of his enemies roll than have them stay in close contact with him at all times. Seemed like I had to get involved with King's Landing too. Chapter 73, New Fanfic. Chapter 73, A Queen for You. Oliver POV. The Three Sisters chapter closed with a happy ending for the victors. Of course, everyone else didn't pay attention to the losers of the war who were still mourning their loved ones. I looked at the islands one last time. The next time I will see them, this place will be very different. I had left my plans with the engineers here and they will fix everything up. The construction of the ports had already started and a couple of thousand men would stay on the island to keep the peace and decimate anyone daring to go against my rule. I wasn't sure just how mad Jonaran might be due to now having a part of his lands given to someone else, without his knowledge. Sure, the Three Sisters might have been his in name only, but that was still better than what I was about to do with the place. Gulltown will lose most of its merchants as the free cities I control behind the scenes will start trading here now. Also, these islands can connect with the north easier too. Closing my eyes, a map of Westeros appeared in my mind and all of the trade routes were memorized. I had studied the streams of water and how they traveled. That way my ships will always be faster than the competition and I would also sell at a lower price for some time in any ingredient that I hadn't monopolized. Even if I had to work at a loss, it would be okay since I had the money of the biggest bank behind me. I could afford to work at a loss to get a monopoly on certain products, but my competitors couldn't. That was the difference between us, just like how no matter how much someone gambled in a casino they couldn't win against the house. Because while the person had a limited supply of money, the casino had a theoretically endless supply. It was simple mathematics on who would win. But I wasn't worried about anyone getting these islands now. Robert had spoken and words said can't be taken back, especially if the words came out of a king's mouth. When another king comes around, they could try and take these lands for me. For which I will have to politely refuse and maybe I might even have my army politely come and send the king a message and inform him to re-evaluate his decision. Whether it was Stannis, Daenerys, Joffrey, Tommen, or even some other king who ended up sitting on the Iron Throne. By then, if my ideas come to fruition, then no king will ever dare even say anything, even if I fucked their wife in front of them. Of course, that was all hypothetical and I had to be very careful to not mess up. A couple of weeks had passed since I set sail and King's Landing was within my sights. I had arrived before Robert here since my ships were faster. The smell was quite bad, and I could already smell the shit from here. Its sewage system must be horrendous. The king lives here? No wonder so many of them went mad. This place already seemed unpleasant and I hadn't even entered yet. I mean, London, my city was only a small sailing distance away, and in there it was like we were in a whole other world. Do you like it? Asked Ariane as she leaned my shoulder. She was wearing a yellow sundress and had her hair tied in a ponytail. Until yesterday she had been wearing normal men's clothes, which consisted of pants and a sailor's shirt. But she couldn't go to King's Landing like that. She was my wife now. No, I already hate the place, I answered her truthfully. What about you? Do you like it? No, the smell is too bad. Dorne is much better. She complained, whispering in my ear and biting my earlobe. I am horny, wanna try making a baby again. She was already pregnant, I could sense it due to my blood magic. But I didn't tell her that and just smiled agreeably. Cersei Lannister POV. The first time I saw Oliver Redhawk in the royal gardens, I had to admit, the young man was handsome. More so than his father. I had seen Arthur before in Harrenhal, and while his swordsmanship was as legendary as they said, his appearance wasn't anything special. Though at the time he had still been able to get that Dornish whore that everyone was drooling over at the time. Still though, Oliver, his silver hair danced beautifully in his head as he walked and his body seemed to be perfectly built. I approached the man in question, for some strange reason my heartbeat fastened like that of a young girl talking to her crush. From the corner of my eye, I noticed his wife looking at me like a hawk. I just smiled back at the Dornish bitch politely, she had nothing on me. Even her husband would rather sleep with me, than with her. I will show her that right now. Excuse me, I called out to Oliver, and as he turned around, a pair of haunting dark eyes greeted me, in contrast to his silver hair. Sir Oliver, I have heard a lot about you. He smiled at me mysteriously. I have heard a lot about you too. All good things I hope. I joked around with the young man and noticed that he didn't seem at all entranced by me. Well, I could understand, handsome men always had women throw themselves at them. Anyway, would you mind accompanying me? I can't wait to hear about your adventures. Of course. He agreed, signaling towards a female bodyguard to stay with his wife. I am sure you are worried about your husband too. He should arrive in a day or two. As expected, all men could be manipulated by using sex. Oliver wasn't any different. Telling me when Robert will arrive, he wanted to get with me. Well, I don't mind, lately, I have been quite bored. As we went deeper into the castle and got closer to my room, a strange sexual tension had built between us, or maybe I was the only one who felt it. Oliver didn't seem bothered and was saying something, but I wasn't listening and just stared at his face. Yes, of course, I agreed with him like I had done a dozen or so times already. He had a sweet voice too. Was he a singer? I wanted to ask him but decided against it. We finally arrived at the doors to my room and 4 men in red Lannister armor stood guard outside. They opened the door and we got in. I looked at the guards and narrowed my eyes threateningly at them. Don't let anyone come in here. After saying that, I grabbed Oliver's hand and dragged him into my room. As soon as the door closed behind us, I felt him escape my grasp. Turning around I saw his smirking face with a mischievous glint in its eyes. My, you are quite naughty my queen, he said, his hand gently touching the scalp of my face and drawing chills down my spine. He licked his lips as his hand slowly went downward. But if we are gonna play this game, we will play it my way. His hand moved fast and he grabbed me by the throat. I didn't even have a chance to scream as his grip around my throat became painfully tight. It felt like he would crush my windpipe if he squeezed any harder. Oliver POV. I almost crushed Cersei's throat by how hard I had grabbed her. Though it won't kill her, this will leave a bruise. But I wasn't playing her games. I will show her who was in charge here. And I will make her understand that she needed me more than I needed her. Forcefully pushing her in bed, Cersei's eyes widened in shock and started rolling to the back of her head as she was about to pass out. That was my sign to release the tight grip I had on her throat. She immediately took in deep breaths and started coughing. I mentioned it and made a sign for her to stay quiet. If it had been anyone else, she would have probably screamed by now. Hell, even if this situation had played when I was Arthur, she would have screamed. What was different with me now that will stop her from screaming? It was my appearance. My current body was handsome as hell and had just the right Valyrian features to be seen as genuinely handsome and not girly. Yet, life became marginally easier if you were handsome. As Arthur, I had to try and be charming, and even then it might not work. But as Oliver, I barely had to do anything and women would be okay with it. What's wrong with you? She asked, looking at me strangely. Though surprisingly there was no hate in her eyes. Oh? Seems like our queen had a little bit of an adventurous stride. I smiled at her. Now. You might have been used to Robert being drunk when he does it. But sex isn't just having a man flop like a fish and drool around. Her gaze immediately turned into an aroused one as she looked at me like a cat in heat. The insult to her husband seemed to put her in the mood. I will forgive you this time. She crawled on her bed and came towards me. Her blonde hair dropping down like a waterfall, she bit her lip lustfully and looked me right in the eyes as she pulled down my pants. My shaft flopped out. It was floppy at first, but as Cersei's hand touched it and moved her hand up and down, it rose up and pointed straight at her face. Whatever words she was about to say died a sad death. As I grabbed her hair, the only protest was another little huh as I took her by her golden locks, and then, to her no doubt surprise, I pushed my shaft in her mouth. I groaned when her lips connected with the root of my shaft, as she had been able to take the whole thing down her throat and I could see her wind canal that I had choked before was now extended to fit my cock. I didn't even stop at the uncertain whimper she gave as I tried to push past her lips as my dick started getting harder and bigger inside her mouth. I feed her until she's left gagging, and only then do I relent. Pulling out of her lips, she coughed a couple of times and stared at my shaft. That was unexpected, she said, grabbing my shaft with her soft hands once more, and this time she fit it in her mouth with no problems. And her head bobs as she goes up and down on my cock. Up, and down. Up and down. Up and down and up and down. Fuck. This might be the best blowjob I have ever had. I groaned the thought and the feel of Cersei's erratic tongue damn near driving me over the edge. Wait. Why was I holding back? It wasn't like I cared about her or how she felt. I looked past the bobbing head of the queen and saw her still clothed body. I wanted more, grabbing her hair once again forcefully, pulling her head in, having all of my shaft hide in her mouth. Her tongue still erratically moved to please me, and as her reward, I squirted my seed in her mouth. Her cheeks puffed and she pulled away from my cock with a pop. Cough cough. She coughed on her hands and looked at me. Do you have to be so rough? You can stop this whenever you want. I smiled at Cersei, and turned her around. She gave me a yelp of surprise but still leaned her ass on my still hard shaft, grinding against it. Now that she had her sense of control back, I was going to break her again. Grabbing the back of Cersei's head, I pushed her face on the bed, which left her. What are you d? I shushed her, looming over her, and then grabbed the dress from her shoulders and ripped it apart, revealing the sexy body hiding beneath all those clothes. I drank all of this in, even the angry and nervous look that takes her. By now she seemed to have noticed that I wasn't someone she could control with her games or sex. No, instead, I will give her an experience that will leave her begging. How many fantasies did you have when you looked at me? I said, ripping off her panties and rubbing her sex. She was already dripping, so I lined my shaft and teased her by circling my tip around it. Fantasies. She stuttered, trying to think clearly but having a very hard time doing so. Don't lie now. I got down on her back, whispering in her ear. I saw the gazes you sent when we met in the garden. IFHHH. She didn't finish her words as my shaft filled her insides, and she gasped for air. The servants might hear that. I ignored her, knowing that her guards wouldn't let anyone get close to here. There was too much talking and enough fucking here. So I started pumping her. Not up and down this time, but in and out. In and out and in and out. I watched as her arse quaked with each of my thrusts. At one point, I spread her cheeks and just watched, watching how I stretched her to her limits, even if I, as with my wife, hit an impasse. I quickly realized something amazing about Circe, no matter that her spit still shone on my dick, or how wet she was. Tight. Too fucking tight. Well, at least she was active during this and tried pushing her arse into my shaft, trying to have me go even deeper in her. It felt so good, that I didn't even care if Ariane knew what was happening right now. Tight, almost uncomfortably tight, her insides gripping me like a soft vice. Not even that soft, really. Fuck. I hit my limits soon after. How couldn't I, with all this? I hope she remembered to drink some moon tea after this. Though having one of my children be royalty didn't sound so bad. I grit my teeth as she milked the last of my release from me. But there was just another problem. I was still hard. In this body, I was still in my teen years, so it was quite energetic. I doubt Circe expected me to continue, but it's not like I understood her incoherent moans and growls that now dominated the atmosphere if muffled by her sheets as she buried her head in them. Around half an hour later, looking down at the ruin I had made of Circe, I started thinking of what excuse to tell my wife, Ariane. Well, I was sure I could think of something. Eventually. As I got up and put on my clothes, I opened the doors to the room. Outside, I saw something unexpected. Ariane was there with a dozen of her personal female guards and they had subdued the men guarding Circe's room. My wife now looked at me with an enraged look on her face. Fuck. Chapter 74, The Mockingbird. Ariane POV. Having someone I am married to and love so much betray me. I was shocked, heartbroken, and it felt like my heart would burst out of my chest. So many emotions ran through me as I saw a sweaty Oliver walk out of the Queen's room. I could still see Circe laying on the bed, tired, with white liquid coming from between her legs. It was infuriating. I wanted to kill Oliver for this betrayal. He looked at me shocked that I was here at first, but then he calmed down and sighed. You shouldn't be here. Why? I asked him, unable to keep the anger in my voice contained. Because you wanted to go and fuck the Queen? What do you take me for? Some stupid girl. Was this what you wanted all along? I couldn't stop the tears from spilling out of my eyes. It was so painful, it felt like my heart would break into 100 pieces if I kept looking at him. He didn't even seem sorry for any of this. Closing the doors behind him, Oliver walked towards me and put a hand on my cheek lovingly. It was wet, and I wondered if it was sweat or something else. Listen, I will explain these things later, he said, getting close and kissing me on the lips. Looking at the female guards who were under my command, he narrowed his eyes. Let the Lannister men go, before I decide to slit your throats. They are still the Queen's men, and attacking someone in the Red Keep is still a big deal. Immediately the female guards let them go. It wasn't surprising that they listened to him. But the looks of fear in their eyes took me off guard. What were they afraid of? While these women were my guards, they were also my friends. Because as we spent time together, we would inevitably develop a friendship, and they even told me how Oliver had hired them from Essos. Still, though, the absolute terror they showed while looking at him made my skin crawl. For a split second, in my jealousy and anger, I had forgotten just how dangerous my husband was. He wasn't afraid of me, even though there were a dozen guards under my control with swords in their hands. Because Oliver knew they would obey him instead of me if the decision came down to it. As we walked down the hallways of the Red Keep, Oliver put a hand over my shoulders and whispered. Don't worry too much, this was a political move. Now I have the Queen's ear. And her mouth too apparently. I couldn't help myself from interrupting him. Why was he acting like this? Why, did he break my heart? Couldn't he have done this somewhere else where I wouldn't know about it? Suddenly, I felt a steel-like grip behind my neck. Looking at Oliver, I saw cold dark eyes staring at me. Don't do that, dear wife, or I will kill you. After saying that, he let off the grip and we continued walking like normal. Anyway, Ariane, this was a political move. Circe is a woman who thinks she can manipulate me, but it will be a turnaround. I just zoned him out. I didn't want to hear his excuses, because, in the end, I would inevitably forgive him. This was the circle of life for me, he would betray and I would forgive. Of course, I wanted to betray him in irritation, even to just make him feel a part of the emotions I felt when he did so. But sadly, that wasn't an option for me. Because if I cheated on him as revenge, Oliver would kill me without a doubt. What irritated me even more, was that I didn't know whether he would kill me because I betrayed him, or because me doing so would just hurt his reputation. I knew quite a lot of what Oliver was doing behind the scenes. It was terrifying. If I had known this sooner, I wouldn't have run away from Dorne and taken my chances there. Love was blind, yeah right, as if I could see what he was doing and I would leave him if it was an option. But sadly, my life will end with him as my husband. Asking help from my father was an option too. But I knew the price of war, and if Dorne decided to go to war with Oliver, then they would have to fight King Robert too. I didn't want to be the reason tens of thousands of kids become orphaned. Oliver POV. Since I had put a child in her, Ariane's worth had pretty much plummeted. She was no longer someone I would even bother with after she gave me a child. I should probably have her die accidentally during childbirth. Other marriages were out there and waiting for me. Wasting my time on her was useless now. Instead, I should be looking for more compatible wives out there. Daenerys Targaryen would be a good choice, but she didn't have her dragons yet. So she was useless too. Marjorie Tyrell, a good choice. But our families have a lot of bad blood between us, and the next thing I know she might decide to poison me and take over everything I have. Well, I will have to look into famous daughters of any lords and see if I could marry them after Arianne dies. A couple more days passed, and I still spent some time with Cersei. She even brought one of her female cousins. She was blonde, had green eyes, and was pretty. Though she still was young and innocent, I and Cersei made sure she lost that innocence of hers. Arianne spent most of the time in one of the rooms with her female guards around. She and I had some fun every now and then, but she didn't seem to be in the mood most of the time. Probably because she could guess what I was doing with Cersei. Well, at least Cersei still had her uses. She had given me quite a lot of intel in the capital. Secret passages, certain black markets, places where you go when you want people killed or start small riots. She was quite open-mouthed about it, telling me many secrets of these walls. Even where one could enter the city through some secret caves. Did she think I was one of her servants who would help her when the time came? Nah, I would rather make sure she died if she used those caves to escape. She had been way more useful than I had expected. By now I had a pretty good grasp on King's Landing and even had some more spies here now. As long as Cersei was in power, she would back me up. The woman thought that she was smarter than she actually was, but I don't mind that even one bit. As I walked through the hallways of the Red Keep, a certain master of coin saw me and he nodded politely. Lord Redhawk, it's good to see you. I smiled back at the man. Peter Baelish, I have heard a lot of good things about you. All good things I hope, he said with a small smirk adorning his face. Mostly, I admitted. Though the rumors of you wanting to buy brothels in King's Landing say a lot of dishonorable things about you. I don't see it as a bad thing. Unlike ships, whores don't sink. Ah yes, I try to tell that to many people, but they just don't listen. Unless you have as many ships as you do, then ships will eventually sink and fleets will fall. He skillfully paid me a compliment while agreeing. What a sly man he was. If I didn't know any better I would think that he was my friend. Or at least close to being friends. But well, I didn't need friends here, though I could make a partnership with the man and work with him. There was no doubt that Peter Baelish was someone competent. Chapter 75, The King's Return. Oliver POV. Peter Baelish, someone who was quite opportunistic, but very competent. If I wanted to take out a spider, I would need the perfect tool to do so. By spider of course I mean Varys. That man had 1,001 plans in his head. The spider always preached about working for the realm in the show, but his actions said a different thing. He was very dangerous and could become the dagger in the night that will stab into my back. I couldn't stay in the Red Keep as he might kill me in some alley or secret tunnel where the hawk wouldn't be able to come and get my soul. So I couldn't stay here. Instead, I should do something more, like empower Peter and have him take care of the spider that had spies on the other side of the world. Anyway, since we are talking about business. The Redhawk family has a lot of money and is interested in investing in more, presumptuous markets too. I smirked when his eyes caught what I had meant. Spies won't be able to decipher what we will discuss here as we do so metaphorically. You can't have educated spies, even the spider doesn't have those. The human brain is programmed to mostly remember the beginning and ending of something. No spy would be able to memorize a whole conversation, just the gist of it at best. While what it might seem to the outside ear as I and Peter talking business things. I had just offered the man a loan if he needed it to purchase more brothels. Of course, the loan won't be paid normally and the Redhawk name can't be associated with brothels. Littlefinger was smart enough to see that, and the knowing smirk on his face said it all. I don't doubt that he planned to slowly weasel out some coins during Robert's reign. But unless you knew the future as I did, then it was a very unstable plan based on a lot of luck. For all Littlefinger knew, Robert could die tomorrow and the Lannisters won't let him steal anything or they will cut his hands. I don't think Peter was dumb enough to try his luck against Tywin Lannister. If he knew the future and that his plan would work, then he won't take the money the Redhawk family offers him. But right now, he didn't know that his plan would work, and it would be better for him to take a loan from me. What's the interest? Asked Peter. His smirk was still there, but the suspicious look in his eyes had intensified. Interest? We don't need something like that. I shook my head. Getting the interest on the debt was useless. Also, I made more money in a day than all the brothels in King's Landing did in a year. So any debt that I lent to Peter and expecting interest would be useless. Instead, what I wanted was a stable connection between the two of us. Something that I could nudge him and instinctively create a sense that we are on the same side. At least make it seem like we weren't obstructing each other's goals. I want 60% of the income of any establishment you will own within King's Landing in the future. With that, you can also get theoretically unlimited funding as long as you use it correctly and show results. My offer was too good to be true, so he would create loopholes on it himself. After all, suspicious people will always do what they are best at. I would be like him too. Who would be mad enough to give such an outrageous wealth away? After all, with this agreement, even if Littlefinger's brothels flopped, there was no danger to him. Since he was paying me with just the percentage of what the place made. So 20% of 0 is still 0. I see, then how about 10,000 gold dragons? He asked, seeming unsure. 10,000? That's it. I thought he would at least ask for 50,000 or 100,000. Maybe Littlefinger hadn't yet gotten a good understanding of just how rich I was and how much money I was willing to lend him. With 10,000 he will never have enough resources to become Varys obstruction. Well, I couldn't force him to take on more debt. But I also knew that he would eventually come and ask for more money for me as he gained experience and understood just how much he needed to make things work around here. It would be a shame if someone burned down his brothels and he had to come and ask more from me. Yes, a real shame. Who am I joking? I am going to vandalize his properties for some time and even have him get deeper and deeper in debt to me. Once you got done and deep enough, I could just call in the debts, and even after Peter built whatever he wanted, I could just take the results of his hard work. This would be seen as equal, but also as normal. To some, it will seem over the top, but their opinions don't matter. After some small gibberish talk, I and Littlefinger came to a deal that I would take 40% of the profits and he would do anything else needed. Like maintenance, management, and if anything went wrong, he would take responsibility. As we parted ways, one of my guards found me and he was breathing heavily. Lord, the king has returned. Is that so? It wasn't any interesting news. Just meant that I had to stop messing around with Cersei so much now. Well, I don't care too much about her, so this should be okay. I waved the man off and went to greet Robert. Cersei POV. I laid in my bed, thinking of the recent nights. It felt like a dream of hot passion. The world around us didn't exist and he was just a knight dishonoring me. That was the relationship between me and Oliver. Those nights we spent together seemed to fly by so fast, it is quite amazing. Getting up from my lavish bed, I look at a mirror and see my naked body. There were marks all around it, a bite in my shoulder, a scratch on my back, and the bruises on my throat, also teeth marks adorned my breasts. A sorry sight for a queen. These were the signs that Oliver had left on my body. I wouldn't dare sleep with anyone else for quite some time, at least until they healed. I would kill anyone who dared do this to me. But this was Oliver. Thinking of him, my heart fluttered like that of a young girl. I still wanted those nights of passion to last forever. It's such a shame that they won't. I won't lie to myself, having him every night made me feel like a young girl getting pummeled by her heroic knight who just revealed his true colors. A relationship solely based on lust. What a nice thing. Sadly now everything will have to end. Your Grace, King Robert has arrived, a guard from outside the door spoke. I frowned. What a shame, I really wanted to continue having some more fun. Chapter 76, Shitty Father. Oliver POV. Robert strode in the Red Keep with a large smile on his face and I was there to greet him. Your Grace, what took you so long? The king smiled and punched me in the shoulder. Even as overweight as he was, there was some power behind his hit. Fa ha ha you brat. I had to get some horse from the Riverlands. Fuck. Why did I forget to do that? I frowned as if I was annoyed by not doing something like that. That amused Robert as he looked at me smugly. Stick around kid, and you might learn something from your elders. He laughed, putting an arm around my shoulder as if we were old friends. I guess by now he probably saw Arthur every time he looked at me. Plus, the helmet on my head used to hide my silver hair around him was helping. Looking to the side of the room, I saw an 8-year-old Joffrey looking at me disdainfully. That little prick better not try anything or he might get an accidental death by falling down one of the many staircases the Red Keep had. I stopped staring at Joffrey and turned my gaze towards Robert. Well, at least I got to fuck an amazing whore in King's Landing. Really? He seemed curious and signaled me to walk with him and dismissed all the guards except Baristan Selmi. What was her name? You think I bother to remember the name of every woman I fuck? I looked at the king strangely, making him chuckle. I then narrowed my eyes suspiciously. Wait, do you bother to do that? No. But if she was good then I would remember her even if I don't want to, Robert chuckled, as we walked towards the throne room as if we were father and son. Maybe he might be imagining the son he never had. She must not have been that amazing then if you can't even remember her name. Well, I remember that she had blonde hair and beautiful green eyes. She was a great sucker too. She seemed to be in her 20s. I think. I had a thoughtful expression on my face. Then sorry to break it to you kid, but she is probably married. By that age, pretty women like that are taken. We arrived at the throne room and Varys was there to greet the king, but Robert just waved him away. He didn't want to have a eunuch during a men's conversation. Well, if I was being honest, he would kinda ruin the mood, there is no denying that. Peter came in, but he caught the mood that was established between me and Robert and decided to run off. So, do you think she is married? He asked, having taken my silence as a small confirmation. I thought so. But as long as her husband doesn't know, then what's the harm? Plus I might have been a little drunk back then. I agreed with him and smiled. Husband, suddenly Cersei came in with a knowing smirk on her face. Our eyes met for a split second and 1,000 words were said in one glance. Be careful the husband doesn't catch you. Also, gotta go, my head-bursting wife is here. Whispered Robert, silently dismissing me and I nodded. I bowed slightly towards Cersei and walked out of the throne room. She now has to talk to the king who I just described how I fucked his wife. As soon as Oliver walked out, Cersei's eyes wandered towards the exit. She then looked back towards her already drunk husband. It was quite disgusting to compare the handsome Oliver with Robert. They were polar opposites. My dear husband, I am glad that you are well, Cersei said politely, but even Robert could tell that it was forceful and she didn't bother to hide her disdain for him. He was the king of 7 kingdoms, but even then he couldn't do anything to get rid of his wife. By now, everywhere he looked, a Lannister's head would pop up. Don't lie to me, said Robert and looked at his wine. Something was missing. There was no cup of wine in it. Wine! He yelled out, and the doors immediately opened. A servant came in with a goblet and cup of wine. Is this one of your servants? Cersei smiled. Yes, I knew what my dear husband would want after coming from war. I know that our children or your wife don't interest you. Robert sighed but didn't refute. He would rather be in war than hear his wife's cold words, even the wall would be warmer than the Red Keep. This place had so many cold-blooded snakes that it made the place cold even in the hottest of summers. He stayed quiet and stared at his filled cup of red wine. It felt so cold and lonely, he still dreamed of Lioness Stark. The woman from the cold of the north made him feel warmer than even 1,000 whores and 7 kingdoms ever could. What a worthless life. No matter what happens, I will die alone with no one to grieve for me. No wife to cry for me, no children worth shit. Though Robert, taking a swing of his wine cup and swallowing the liquid in one fellow swoop. He then looked at his wife with a frown. What are you still here for? Do you have anything to say? Cersei smiled. Your pained expression amuses me. It makes the days less boring. She then walked off the throne room, leaving Robert with a female servant holding a goblet of wine. Normally he would try something with her, but the woman looked too much like Cersei. That bitch, hope she breaks her neck one day. Like always Robert drank wine to try and fill the hole in his heart. He didn't want to think about how people didn't care about him and just how cold even his castle had become. Fuck. Arthur, you had to go and die too damn early. Your son might not look like you, but he sure acts a lot like his father. POV, I looked at myself in the mirror, a beautiful face that took after my mother with dark eyes and hair that my mother said took after my father. Well, my mother was dead and I had nothing from my father except a dagger. It seemed like I would never know where I came from. My mother was a Bravasi whore who tried to get her young daughter into the business. I slashed her throat as soon as she tried forcing me to do something. I killed her with the same dagger she used to say that my father gave her once she noticed that she was with a child. What a shitty father. Sigh. I had no money and renting this room would end with me being sold into prostitution if I didn't run away. Those rich bastards from the Redhawk family were always cruel. But the world was always like this, the rich ruled like kings while the poor could barely get by. Samira miss? Are you there? A voice came from the other side of the door and a silver-haired head peeked through the door. I was wearing barely anything right now so the small girl scampered off. Sorry, I thought you were clothed. I smiled. Daenerys, where is that fool Viserys? I asked her as I put on some comfortable clothes. Making sure to cover my weak points with leather armor. Big brother is being beaten by the inn owner. Did you tell him that Viserys was the one paying? He doesn't have any money though. As always, the innocent Daenerys, though she was only 9 years old, I knew she would grow up to become quite a beauty. Though I was only 5 years older than her, the difference in mindset was quite big. She still had that innocence of hers. I picked up a rapier sword and grabbed Daenerys' hand and slowly started walking out. Don't worry, they won't kill him. The Redhawks will probably force him to do some labor work and then let him go. Really? How do you know that? She gazed at me with a relieved, but curious look in her eyes. Smiling at her, I clasped some of her silver hair. It was so beautiful. Well, the Redhawk family operates on profit. Killing your brother wouldn't bring any profit, but his free labor would. Ah, I understand now. Daenerys nodded seriously. But I could tell she didn't understand anything. Chapter 77, Arthur's Legacy. Semiramis POV. Daenerys, a little beggar girl. By now I knew she was royalty, even though I acted like I didn't know about her. As we walked outside of the inn, I talked to the little girl to try and distract her from Viserys whimpers as he got beat up. So, have you ever seen a knife? I asked her, pulling out the dagger that my mother used to say came from my father. I had no idea what it was made of, but it never seemed to rust or even need cleaning. Daenerys turned the dagger around and saw writings on the other side. Never give up. She read it out loud. Well, that was surprising. I never bothered to learn reading or writing. Also, I was too afraid to show anyone my dagger and ask them what was written on it. I don't know, but the dagger seemed very pricey. What do you think of it? I asked the little princess. She looked at me with a huge smile. It's cool, I have never seen something like it. She exclaimed innocently. I picked up the dagger and hid it in my clothes as we went outside and there were people around us. Where do you think we should go? Daenerys looked around with uncertainty. I don't know. Crouching down, I put my hands on her shoulders and smiled. Dany, sometimes, you must decide your own road in life and not let others interfere for you. So, what do you choose? This girl was someone that... Well, I didn't exactly have any special connection with her. I just met her and her brother who seemed like a fool. While I was planning to use her brother to get a free night at the inn since it was better than the cold streets. This young girl, I was unable to use. She would sell high at the brothels, and I could get a lot of money out of it. But she reminded me too much of myself to do so. A young girl alone in the world with a shitty family member. Then to the right. She was unsure and her words seemed like she was asking a question. But I only smiled and we went right, following her instructions. If this girl didn't learn to make her own decisions, only suffering will follow through her life. One needed to choose for themselves what they wanted and didn't want, or else they would end up miserable. Make way for Trey Redhawk. Someone yelled, and I pulled in Daenerys close to my chest as a carriage flew past us. A carriage with 2 horses rode so fast that it seemed like it was flying, and almost hit many civilians. Fucking Redhawks, I muttered under my breath, annoyed at having to deal with those pricks. Redhawks? Who are they? Daenerys asked curiously. Just some strong house from the other side of the sea, Westeros, I explained. They pretty much control everything here in Braavos. Wow, so they must be a pretty powerful family. Of course. Also, let me warn you Daenerys, as someone I have grown fond of. Never, and I mean never. Pick a fight with a Redhawk. They are as petty as they come, and the founder of the house Arthur Redhawk had a bloody history in Braavos. What did he do? The young girl's childish curiosity made me hesitate. Should I be telling a 9-year-old girl such things? No. She should learn about reality before it becomes too late. Arthur Redhawk was a man who was said to have killed anyone who crossed him even for the smallest of things. Yet, the civilian people loved him. You know, there used to be a ruler of Braavos called the Sea Lord. But he too got in Arthur's way, and his whole family was killed, with their heads being put on pikes. Daenerys' body shook with fear as she looked on the ground. So people from the other side of the sea are all scary like that. People are scary everywhere, I mentioned. But I also noticed how Daenerys seemed to flinch at the mention of Westeros. Whether it's here, or the other side of the world. As those thoughts came to mind, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of man my father might have been. Oliver POV. I wasn't too sad to leave King's Landing with my wife. Robert though was sad, even Cersei seemed a little put off by my leave. Did she think I was going to stay here because of her? Well, I had to go, my wife was super depressed and I didn't want her mood to get bad enough to affect the baby. Arianne still holed herself in a room with female guards all around her. Lord, one of the female guards came by. She had caramel-colored skin, dark blue eyes, and wore tight leather armor, with small metal plates on critical places. The female guard was holding onto a clean white sheet. We have reason to believe that Lady Arianne might be pregnant. I nodded calmly, already knowing that. Now I just had to make sure Arianne doesn't do something reckless like try and get rid of the baby. Because if she does, then I will rape her if I have to have another child with her. She better not test me on this, or I will make her life a living nightmare. Even while thinking that, I tried to not show any of my thoughts on my expression. Good, make sure she doesn't have any accidents. Things will still have to move along. Dorne was within reach as long as I could assassinate the rest of the Martells, maybe leave only the reckless sand snakes around. It would be the perfect opportunity to build upon things there. Though this was only an initial plan and it will be hard to accomplish as not only were a couple Martells spread all over Essos but there was even one in the Maester's citadel. The White Walkers also were still a problem and I hadn't exactly confirmed if they are the book version or TV show version. Because if it was the book version, then this whole thing changes into hell mode difficulty. I was nowhere near powerful enough to handle the others. Ned Stark POV. I looked at the Valyrian sword that had been passed to the Starks through generations. Taking a deep breath, I once again reminisce on how the weirwood trees make me easy. 2 months ago, Arthur's son, Oliver had taken over the three sisters. Though impressive, it wasn't something that the North would need to worry about. At least until recently. House Redhawk had sent a letter offering a deal for the North and I wasn't sure what was the right choice on the matter. Though I knew Arthur, considered the man a close friend and even respected him. But I had no idea how the new head of House Redhawk was. Though, they will be meeting soon. Ned couldn't exactly refuse another lord's request to meet when he was willing to travel to Winterfell too. My lord, Luwin's voice came through the forest. I had heard his footsteps in the grass and leaves even before he came here. Lord Redhawk's men have been sighted close. Open the doors and welcome them, I told him, getting up and ready to meet the legacy Arthur had left behind. Chapter 78, Northern Charm. Oliver POV. The North had its charms too, very cold, dreary, deadly, and uncomfortable charms. If this was a modern world, living here wouldn't be so bad. But in a time like this, living here sucked. Of course not for Ned and Catelyn, since their bedroom was built right above a hot spring. I was sitting in the dining room, and was offered bread and salt and received as a guest. Then they offered me and my main soldiers a decent meal. I had another rope of over 100 men, but I couldn't bring them into Winterfell. Instead, they went into the towns nearby to enjoy themselves. Lord Redhawk, Ned's voice rang through the hallway as he strode towards me with his leather cloak swishing off his shoulders and the giant Valyrian sword on his back. I welcome you to Winterfell. He sounded serious as hell. But I didn't take it to heart, knowing how Ned can sometimes be. Political talk was way out of his broad spectrum. Lord Stark, it's an honor to meet you, I smiled and got up offering a handshake, which he accepted with a small smile on his face. My father used to say a lot about you. Mostly good things. Just like with Robert, I used the Arthur card here too. Can't let the friendship that I built into my past life end up useless. Gotta milk that for all it's worth. Mostly, he asked, a small smirk making its way into his face and his eyes brightened. I chuckled along, easing the stuffy demeanor between us. Even if the joke hadn't worked, as long as I didn't back away due to awkwardness, the relationship will always improve. I learned this in my first life, there was no need to be awkward or show just how little I liked being around others. Damn, I used to be so lonely during my younger years back then. Once you understand that even the strongest, most intimidating, and powerful person in the world shits and has to wipe his ass, then the factor of nervousness completely disappears. The hardest part of any task was always starting, because when you do, then you are very likely to finish it. Ugh, I remember the days these kinds of things used to motivate me to work harder. It was a life changer. Well, father said a lot of things about you challenging him when he was drunk and how he almost lost. He always said that was the closest he had ever come to losing and since then rarely drank alcohol, and even when he did, it wasn't enough to impede his senses. Ned chuckled, as a melancholic gaze settled in his eyes. Remembering the time when I was drunk as Arthur. Well, in my previous life in this world, I was known as the undefeated knight. But as Oliver, I want to be known for another thing that will put fear in my enemies' hearts. We sat down at a table and he casually got some breakfast brought to him too. So, why are you here then? Sighing, I took out a small notebook and opened it at a certain page. On it were written some of Arthur's plans. Underscore. Help the North food situation. Build a port in the North to connect it with Bravos to increase trade. Make more glass gardens and sell food in the North at a low price. R plus L equals J. Underscore. Ned read it calmly and smiled at his old friend's thoughtfulness. But once his eyes landed on the last part, I immediately saw his eyes widen marginally. I acted like I didn't notice it. Though he liked to act like the cold and unbeatable knight, father had quite the soft heart. Oh. That was all he said, too shocked by what he had just read. After all, this was from my father and the code, in the end, showed that he knew Jon Isrogr and Lyanna's son. If this were to become public knowledge, who knew where it would lead? Well, I was here just to complete one of his plans. He wanted to help the North's food situation and needed a port. He never usually wrote what he meant here, always just small things or even used code words sometimes. I told him and pointed to the last part of the letter. I still have no idea what this means. Since it was on a page with the North's plans. Do you have any idea what it means? No. He answered absent-mindedly. Ned still was a terrible liar as always. Definitely shouldn't have gone to King's Landing in Cannon. No wonder he got killed there. Well. About the port, I have a plan to make it successful enough that just the taxes from it will be able to feed the North through a 10-year winter. I was thinking of building it close to the Widow's Watch since the three sisters will be the ones communicating and handling the White Harbor. I took out a map and pointed out many different places where we could build and the advantages of each of them. As long as it's not built close to White Harbor, then it won't impede the economy with the rest. Though I explained all of that to him clearly, and Maester Lewin was here with us. It was clear that Ned wasn't concentrating on it at all and instead just looked at the small page of the book. The revelation right now that someone else knew of the secret had unnerved him. Can we have this talk another time? Asked Ned, suddenly getting up, not having even touched his food. Of course, Lord Stark, I nodded, but at the same time made myself seem a little uncertain why he left. Displaying to the observant Maester that I truly was not confident and that Ned might refuse. As predicted, Maester Lewin sat down and smiled at me gently, like a kind grandpa. Lord Stark must be distressed by it. In my eyes, this plan seems good. I am sure he will agree. After saying that, he went back and chased after Ned, probably to ask what caused his sudden change in mood. I take the small notebook and put it back in my jacket. Ned POV. How was that possible? Those thoughts raced through my head as I went back to my room. How could Arthur have figured this, and now there was a chance Oliver would too. But why didn't Arthur act or say anything back then? He and Robert were closer, and John was a threat to his reign as king. I had tried so hard to hide John from the world. Not even my wife knew about it. Yet Arthur was able to figure it out. But, how many more people had figured it out too? Was there someone else who had this information that I didn't know about? My lord, is everything all right? Lewin, as the loyal man he was, had followed me and expressed his worries. Don't worry, Lewin. I was just a little sad at being reminded of my old friend. I tried to brush it off. Even though the Maester wasn't convinced by my words, he let it go and nodded, going away. I entered my bedroom and the hot air immediately filled my nostrils and I could feel the heat traveling to my lungs. Normally such a relaxing feeling would calm me down and clear my mind, but right now, it made things even more complicated. Just how long would it take for Arthur's son to figure it out? Like his father, he seemed to be a bright young man too, and this was bound to start a war against the North if word of it got out. I still remembered just how Robert laughed at the Targaryens' babes when they were thrown in front of him after the sacking of King's Landing. Closing my eyes, I took a deep breath. My mind showed me, John, getting his head chopped off by the king's executioner even though he wouldn't do anything like a fight for a throne. He was too kind. Lina, keeping your promise has never been harder. But I will protect my nephew, no matter what. Thoughts of having Oliver killed here in the North crossed my mind. After all, protecting the family came first. But I couldn't do it, no matter how hard I tried to demonize the young man in my head. He hadn't done anything wrong, and his father even kept the secret and died with it. Killing Arthur's son now would be the same as spitting on his grave after the trust he showed in me. Suddenly the door creaked open, and my heart jumped a beat. Even though I knew that there was no danger here. I turned around and saw my wife, Catelyn, looking at me worriedly. Lewin told me that you seem distressed. And you truly do. I wanted to tell her so bad. But I couldn't. If she started treating John even a little differently now, then word of it would get out and people always seemed to assume things. Except now, if someone who had a big mouth knew of the secret that I was too afraid to even say out loud, then the North would turn into hell. Houses like the Boltons and the Whitehills will be the first to try and come after my head. They only needed a reason to do so. Chapter 79, Negotiation Fatale. Oliver POV. Since the meeting with Ned Stark ended so predictably fast, I decided to go and do something else. Meet a certain young man. As I walked along Winterfell, one of my guards accompanied me constantly, always keeping guard. He was someone who had a certain blood ritual done on him, so he was stronger than the average man. On the training ground, I saw a dark-haired young man with grey eyes shooting arrows at the dummy. His shooting was good, but not that good. He took too long on the draw. Still, though, he seemed to be around 10 years old, so I couldn't blame his skills here. Smiling at him, I walked down and put my hand on his unsuspecting shoulder. You shouldn't think too much when you shoot. He looked at me and I smiled, offering him my hand. Can I borrow your bow? I could teach you a couple of tricks. He nodded respectfully. Yes, my lord. Did I look like a lord? Hey, I guess due to my clothes I probably did. Also with the added silver hair, I seemed more like a Targaryen too. Picking up his bow, I tested its balance, and immediately my eyes sharpened. I hadn't shot a bow in a long time, but I knew the chances of me missing were just as non-existent as they were before. I took out an arrow from the quiver on his back and shot without even needing to look any more than a glance. Your enemy won't stay still and wait until you have aimed, Oe advised him and picked up another arrow and shot. This time I didn't even look at the target, but due to exchanging views with my hawk, I knew that it had landed on the head of the straw target. In less than 7 seconds I shot almost 10 arrows and each of them landed on the target's head. Don't think too much in a fight, it only makes you complacent. By the way, my name is Oliver Redhawk. I am Jon Snow, the young man answered hesitantly. I smiled at him and patted his back. Don't worry, I have many bastard sisters and brothers, though father legitimized many of them. As many as he could. Some weren't legitimized by the time he died, I smiled at him reassuringly. In my eyes, it doesn't matter if you are a bastard or not, family is still family. Getting closer I slowly whispered to him. I used to be a bastard myself too. Jon smiled. So, your father must be Arthur Redhawk, right? His eyes seemed to shine at the mention of my father. I could see it in his gaze, the admiration. They say that his duel against Arthur Dane was legendary. Well, I wasn't there to see it. But father was quite the swordsman, though in the last days of his life he was riddled with sickness and could barely move, I sighed. At the time that had been the after effect of using magic, a mistake that I won't make a second time. Though even if I went back, it wouldn't change what I did at the time. Those were the best decisions possible for the situations I was in. Do you need help with a sword? I am decent at that too. He nodded excitedly and we went to the training grounds. Along the way we met Roderick Castle. Lord Redhawk, do you need the training grounds for something? Though his face was stern, I knew he didn't mean anything bad by it and I just nodded. Yeah, Sir Roderick, I would like to teach young Jon here some sword moves. After all, it's the least I could do for someone who admires my father. He nodded and smiled. I remember the day your father fought against the Sword of the Morning. It was the best sword fight I ever saw in my life. I smile like a child should when they are proud of their father and we get on the ring. We were both using dull swords and Jon had a pathetic stance full of openings. But I didn't mind that at all and I started teaching him. Until the sun started setting, I helped Jon with his swordsmanship. Essentially I tried to teach him everything I knew and hoped that this would help him when he goes to the wall. Because I was counting on him to hold back those White Walkers until we were at least remotely ready to handle them. By the time we finished the training, Jon was on the ground, breathing heavily. Roderick Castle was outside, looking at me with a smile. If I didn't know any better I would think that you are trying to make Jon here the best swordsman in the kingdoms. As a master at arms, he could see that I was teaching Jon diligently and tried to impart onto him everything I knew. In the end, I would even leave Roderick Castle with a training schedule for Jon before dinner time came around. Ned POV. As dinner came around, I didn't have an appetite at all. I had heard that Oliver was training Jon all day long. Currently, I was sitting at the main table of the hall and waiting for the guest to arrive after he washed after training. You should have seen his moves, my lord, just like his father, that Redhawk swordsmanship was something almost otherworldly. Something almost impossible to learn unless someone was fighting for a big part of his life. Roderick seemed to have been impressed by the young man and just how willing he had been to teach Jon. Damn, I wish I was there for that. Do you think Lord Redhawk will teach me too, father? Asked Rob, my firstborn son. I smiled at him. Why don't you ask him yourself? I see no reason why he would refuse you. As soon as I finished saying that, Oliver came in and I had to admit he looked almost like royalty and I could hear Sansa whisper amongst her friends. Like all girls her age do, she most likely was enamored by such a handsome young man. Well, after she grew up a little more, a betrothal between the two of, oh, right. I almost forgot that Oliver was already married to a Dornish girl. I could see Catelyn sending Jon a glare, but he was too happy while eating to notice such things. It seemed like the training had brightened his mood. This was something I should be thankful to him for, but I couldn't help but deep in my heart question myself if Oliver had figured out Jon's parentage. Lord Stark, Lady Stark, he bowed towards us politely and sat down. The hot springs here were good. Never thought there would be such a special place here in the winter. He was good with his words. Better than his father had ever been. I am glad you liked them, though you can call me Ned, I smiled at him. After all, those titles before our names shouldn't be something that we care about. He sat opposite of us and nodded. You can call me Oliver too. I think that the relationship between our families should remain good. But we will have these negotiations for later. True, Maester Luwin had explained Oliver's strategy and it was quite good. It would bring the north a lot of riches and even create a direct trade route with Bravos. The Redhawk family had some connection with Bravos and the Iron Bank. Even during Arthur's time that was obvious. Though I had no idea what their relationship was, it seemed like a cooperative one. I silently went to my food and tried to think of an apology. After all, walking out before as he had tried to negotiate such a good deal for the North wasn't something I wanted to break the good relationship between our houses. Also it was a pleasure training someone like John, he is good with the sword. How about your other son? I could try teaching him too. If you would allow it, of course. With just a couple of words he changed the conversation and tried to turn it in a helping direction even for us. As soon as the conversation turned towards John, and how good he was with a sword, Catelyn interfered and said, "How is your wife? Arianne Martell is known as the Flower of Dorne." Oliver nodded. "She was supposed to come with me as she had never visited the North before. But we recently got the news that she was pregnant, so we had to change our plans." "Oh, you have my best wishes then. What do you think it will be? A boy or a girl?" asked Catelyn, trying to make a friendly conversation. "Well, in all honesty, I want my first child to be a girl. Arianne wants a boy. She is worried too much about making an heir to the Redhawk family. But I am not so worried. Daughters are nicer to their parents and not as reckless as boys. She could help her younger brothers. Also, daughters are gentler." Oliver had a happy smile on his face as he said that. It seemed that, unlike some lords, he wasn't overly obsessed with having an heir. "I understand that family is everything. That was the first thing our father taught me and my siblings. Though not many know, I used to actually be a bastard that was later legitimized." My wife's happy gaze immediately turned cold once she heard that. "And you are now leading your family?" This was the thing that she was worried about happening with John too. He would take Rob's place and become the head of House Stark. Her misguided belief on bastards being children of sin was clouding her mind. The good impression she had of Oliver before had now turned into a cold gaze that would freeze worse than any winter in the North. "Yes, after my older brother died. I was the one in line." Oliver smiles gently. Catelyn wasn't pleased by that at all. "Well, that seems convenient." Immediately Oliver's gaze went from cheerful to cold. "What are you suggesting here, Lady Stark?" The once happy atmosphere on the table turned frosty.